I should have muted. Yep.
You coughed.
Hi,
Right as I unmuted and the music stopped, you went.
It was the outro to the music. It's
it's perfect.
You know.
But yes, hello everybody.
Hi,
As
everybody.
you can tell, we do in fact have two guests with us today. A mysterious coughing man.
They're giving themselves away before we can introduce themselves.
Sorry.
All right, cool. Well. So as long as we sound good, let's kick this off. No issues, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm
cool.
sure people will let us know.
Okay, then we'll do the official start. The fourth and last, for our purposes, of these remarkable women emerged from the twisted towers and blasted keeps of Harrenhal, that vast ruin beside the water of the God's Eye. Shunned and forgotten since Daemon Targaryen and his nephew Aemond had met there for their final flight, Black Heron's accursed seat had become a haunt of outlaws, robber knights, and broken men, who sallied forth from behind its walls to prey upon travelers, fisherfolk, and farmers. A year ago, they had been few, but of late their numbers had grown, and it was being said that a sorceress ruled over them, a witch queen of fearsome power. Mm-hmm. That just sounds so cool. I mean, right? And it kind of came out of nowhere, right? I don't think anyone was expecting this, even though we had a preview of Alys Rivers in The World of Ice and Fire and The Princess and the Queen. The detail we had didn't really lead, I don't think a lot of people expected this to be how this character was filled out. And, frankly, the character still has more filling out to do because, you know, she's part of the crossover into Fire and Blood, too. And with a name like that, Witch Queen of Harrenhal, it definitely sounds like a nod to Lord of the Rings, the Witch King of Angmar. And it probably is. George, of course, is a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. There's no way he missed that. But George, being who he is, it's not just a nod. There's a lot more going on here. As usual, we did our research, and as usual, whoa, there's way more there than we thought. And and we continue to be surprised, even though this is the pattern that happens every time.
This has never happened to you before, Aziz. This is the first time.
Yeah, it's the first time we've been surprised by the depth of material.
How many Blood Raven episodes? Like 16 at this point?
I think it's 25. Yeah, no. Yeah. It's 1,001, actually. Yeah, 1,000 episodes in one.
There you go.
But it's not just a very deep topic that covers a lot of things that we weren't expecting. It actually has a lot of relevance to the Endgame, because Harrenhal sits right on the lake, the God's Eye, which itself has all kinds of endgame foreshadowing and theories about it. So that makes this extra enticing as a topic, in my opinion. And Alys Rivers herself is a witness to this famous dragon duel that happened at the God's Eye. And some of that itself may be part of the endgame. So, a lot to say about that. And, of course, there's George's literary skills are really on display with this analysis here as well, which is something that I sometimes am surprised by because, you know, I have a reasonable understanding of literary stuff, but it's not my expertise. There's a lot of like finer points of literary academics that I just don't get.
You weren't an English major or anything like it.
No, exactly. So so we have some great guests here that are going to help fill this out and have some amazing thoughts, things that were blowing my mind, and my mind was already blown by some of the things I found on my own. So I hope you guys feel the same after we get through all this. So let's start off with JoeMagician. Yeah. Say hey, Joe.
No,
how you doing?
You have to introduce him.
You've already coughed your way.
Are you kidding me? Okay, JoeMagician. He's handsome. He's clever. He's got blue eyes like the deep ocean, and he can chew gum and talk at the same time and cough during our intro. So he's pretty cool.
I see you guys changed it back. I wrote in the document that he can chew gum and chalk at the same time.
I figured I was tired when I wrote that, so it was an error. That could fix it.
That was me. Well, tell everyone where to find you these days and what you've been working on.
Tell me where to find you specifically, clearly.
Tell Ashaya.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You can obviously find me on my own YouTube channel, youtube.com/JoeMagician. Recently put out a trailer analysis video like everyone else in the world did. Upcoming for, link to this, a history of House Strong, which will heavily feature Alys Rivers as well, and a Q&A video. There's also Maester Monthly, the podcast I co-host with the fellow Song of Ice and Fire mods, like Glass Table Girl, Bookshelf Stud, Fat Walda, sometimes Jeff. We don't like it when Jeff's on, but he does sneak on.
It's amazing how well he owns that role.
Yeah,
the troll role.
He's always the heel. And of course, Watchers on the Wall, where I'm a feature writer for them. I think I'm going to be doing another beer review soon, so that'll be pretty sweet.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And this is, how many times have you been on our show? Is this second or third or
fourth? I think this is fourth.
Cool. All right. Yeah, as soon as I said second, I was like, no, it can't be only two.
There was the prequel, there was the disease one, and I think there was another one in there somewhere.
Yeah, there might have been, or maybe that was just we were together on someone else's channel. Anyway, we're all familiar with each other.
We've been on panels together at Con of Thrones.
Panels together at Con of Thrones. That's a good time for that to mention. Con of Thrones. You can get $5 off your ticket purchase by using the code HISTORY, and we'll be there, including Sean and JoeMagician here. And we have our other guest to announce, who's their first time on our show. And that is Lauren, a.k.a. the good bard of Twitteros. Say hey and tell everybody how awesome you are, because we already know.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is my History of Westeros debut. I'm really excited to be here. I am Shakespeare of Thrones. Some of you might follow me at Shakes of Thrones on Twitter. Good bard of Twitteros is just something I made up on the spot to compete with JoeMagician's blue eyes, deep as the ocean. But Lord knows we need more good bards in Westeros.
And maybe a couple of bad bards just to balance it out, because that creates stories. That's how you know the good bards are good, by comparing them to the bad.
True. Anyway, I have written a few essays on the influence of Shakespeare in A Song of Ice and Fire. You can find them on my website at shakespeareofthrones.com. And I wrote an essay back in October before Fire and Blood came out. It was around the Halloween time, about the witch archetype in A Song of Ice and Fire. And I found a lot of interesting things that George R.R. Martin does with subverting the archetypes of the mother, maiden, and crone in the aspects that we know as the seven, and turning those into the three main witch archetypes in his series. So excited to talk about that a little bit.
Right on. Yeah. In fact, it was that essay that she just mentioned is one of the main reason I wanted you to come on today. I read that and was like, oh man, we got to have her. She knows her stuff. And this is super in line with this topic. And it was mostly new to me. Shakespeare stuff is mostly over my head. So this is very much a learning experience for me as well. So
right, sure. And we find it in Shakespeare. I mean, we find those same subversions of those archetypes in Shakespeare, but also myth and fairy tale. And certainly when Fire and Blood came out, I was reading Alys Rivers with very interested in her portrayal of a witch, and just thinking, oh man, I need to return to that essay and write a little bit more, but I haven't. So I'm here now, and I'm so happy to be talking about this topic with you guys.
It works out perfectly that you wrote that right before this new witch character came out. So yeah, it's really a lot of serendipity here.
Yeah, and that was actually a duo project. Shakes wrote her essay, I wrote mine, and then we did a live stream afterwards. But just to give you an example of how much she knows about this, I essentially gave her my essay and said, please correct this, because I'm sure there are things that are wrong.
Oh, it was a great essay. It really was.
Yep. Cool. So we'll see a lot of that play out throughout this episode, a lot of the analysis y'all did, and maybe a few new things as well. George... It's fun to note that, like I mentioned, this Witch King of Angmar nod, that's something that a lot more people would catch. And George has put nods to a lot of fandoms in his books. Star Wars, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, the Dragonbone Chair. There's so many. I'm sorry?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, yeah, there's tons. So it only makes sense that there would be things like this as well, nods to Shakespeare, which maybe fewer people will catch that, but it's just as much present. Just because fewer people catch it doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean it's not really important. And the fact that fewer people may have caught it, maybe that is cool for sharing it with more people. This will be enlightening to more people than it might have been. Okay, so let's do a couple quick shout outs and get started. If you want to make sure you're kept up to date on our streams and when our episodes are released, YouTube, maybe several months ago, I'm not sure exactly when, changed how notifications work. So if you want to make sure you get notified when we go live or when we put up a new episode, click that little bell button right by the like and dislike button. Also, hit that like button while you're at it. Thanks to a couple of our patrons who make the show possible, make it possible for us to spend so much time researching and making videos. Starting off with our first sword, Jeff Gnarly the Long Snapper, and our Dragon Rider patrons, Talanis the Talon, King of Gagasos, Rider of Telarius, the Red Dragon with Scales, Horns, and Talons of Midnight Black, and Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burned King of Blazewater Bay, Rider of Atraxis, a black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers, and a banded blue tail. And also want to shout out our podcast network, Agora. This is every month we feature a different Agora show. This month we're not featuring any particular show. We're doing a shout out for advertisers. If you want to get your show or get your company more noticed, we have over 1 million downloads a month throughout all the Agora shows, and all the shows are highly curated and researched. They're basically kind of like this show, but on different topics. Similar preparation and love of the material. So a lot of good opportunities there. So if you're an advertiser and interested in that, contact Agora Podcast Network at gmail.com. Okay.
I should probably do another mention here as
check
well.
This out.
If you notice, I'm wearing a jacket in this stream. It's not that it is freezing cold here in Atlanta. It's actually quite nice out today. But this is a nice windbreaker jacket. It's a Blackfire Rebellion jacket, as in Blackfire mixed with Star Wars Rebellion. As you can see if you're watching the video. If not, we'll have an image of it in the podcast version. But this is made by our friend Chuck, who goes to Con of Thrones and Ice and Fire Con. He's just a great, awesome cosplayer. But he has a website called Fanamaniacs. That's Fanamaniacs.
Yeah, Fanamaniacs.
And you can find things like this windbreaker and other mashup shirts and jackets, like a House Snow jacket and some other stuff like that. And we will be talking about that a little bit more in the coming weeks.
That's right. Chuck actually went viral back in September for DragonCon. He did a Doctor Strange cosplay that actually had like the lights and moving panels for his hand.
Yeah, really he did incredible. Multiple Doctor Stranges. He did like one that was an homage to had Stan Lee in it. Mm-hmm. He did like a Playboy Bunny one.
Yeah,
the original one.
Really
and he did
fun.
A Marriott carpet one. Anyways, he's a very talented cosplayer and has some really cool clothes on this site. So check that out.
Looks like we got a super chat from Dana the Dreamy. First time live. Thank you for all the wonderful, entertaining, insightful content. Irish wristwatch for the new guest. Maybe. We'll see how much time we have. We've only got her for half the time, so we're going to have to move quickly here. All right, so first thoughts here. We're going to intro the topic, kind of take a high-level view at it. Here's a little quote about that I want to show where the concept of witch queen and witches maybe have first sort of developed in Westeros. Just to show that this isn't the only character that's gotten a name like this, but one of the few. During the long centuries, when the first men reigned supreme in Westeros, countless petty kingdoms rose and fell in the Riverlands. Their histories, entwined and embroidered with myth and song, are largely forgotten, save for the names of a few legendary kings and heroes whose deeds are recorded on weathered stones and runes whose meanings are even now disputed at the Citadel. Thus, whilst singers and storytellers may regale us with colorful tales of Artos the Strong, Florian the Fool, Nine-Fingered Jack, Shara the Witch Queen, and the Green King of the God's Eye, the very existence of such personages must be questioned by the serious scholar. So maybe it's just a coincidence that the only other witch queen in Westeros that we hear of is in the Riverlands. There is one other witch queen mentioned in canon, but she's a Dothraki, so I'm not sure that's too relevant to this, except for it's cool to it's worth mentioning. But I'm not sure we can draw a whole lot of parallels there, partly because we know nothing about her. She's a one-line character.
Yeah, it just speaks to that this is a kind of trope that cultures, civilizations all over the world, both real world and elsewhere, associate.
That's a very good point, and it's very true. It's going to be a big part of this episode, is talking about how not only real life people, real tropes, but in-world tropes, medieval tropes, and tropes that George has captured in an attempt either to subvert them or to show them, or maybe deconstruct them. A little of each, and different depends on the situation. So Harrenhal itself also, speaking of a place that has a lot of exaggerations and tall tales told about it, well, so we're piling those things on together. You've got a character who has who has lots of tall tales and exaggerations, maybe, told about her, and a place that has these same things said about it. So you got this double whammy of gossip and power. And the thing is, gossip is common about powerful women and other people, but it takes on a different tone a lot of times with powerful women, especially in a setting like this. But gossip isn't always wrong, especially in a setting with magic. So that's kind of the weird thing here, is that in the real world, if someone's like, oh, this woman's bathing in blood and casting spells, you're like, okay, you need a lot of proof for that. But in this setting, I'm skeptical about the bathing in blood, but she definitely has magic, right? Like the prophecy stuff is right there. So this makes it a little trickier. But she also reminds us of a lot of fun characters who were treated similarly.
Some of whom we know for a fact did have magic, and others we really don't know for sure. Like Danelle Lawston, I don't know that I think she necessarily had much magic, but she lived in Harrenhal and had access to books. Whereas like Melisandre, we know for sure she did. You know. And
then Shiera Seastar said to do all these same things: bathe in blood.
And I do tend to think that she did use magic just because she was of a peer of Bloodraven who did as well. So it makes sense to me.
Okay,
and Egg thought so too.
Yeah. So, Lauren, let's get your first take here. Talk about Shara for a minute. Tell us what you think about this and the general trope of that, and just your overview.
You know, my initial thought was when I read these show notes about the recurrent motif of rivers. You know, whether it's Witch Queens of the Riverlands or the surname Rivers, I thought, wow, that must be really intentional. And I think it's really interesting because it also brings to mind Brynden Rivers and all the magic that takes place in the Riverlands in the main series. I think George is definitely intrigued by rivers as a metaphor for magic and great power. And I think it's not, you know, a difficult stretch to imagine why, because a river is a very powerful force.
Yeah, I mean, we see that in Essos too, of course.
Gives life,
that's like one of the more magical places that we see in the whole series, obviously, is the Bridge of Sorrows and all that.
And the Rhine, I mean,
the
they
Rhine
worship
in general. Like, so we do see rivers as a very magical place.
That's a good take there. I think that maybe you're right. George is very bought into the religious and mystical and significance of that as a life giver and as a beyond that. Joe, what about you? What do you think? You got some good some notes here.
Yeah, I actually took notes for this one.
You always take notes.
Low behind the scenes. Usually my live streams are off the cuff. This one I went in for because of my video. This is really on my mind at the moment. But like when you talk about the concept of witches and sorceresses in Westeros in particular, like it's sort of a blanket term that gets thrown on a lot of powerful women as a way of sort of like knocking them down or linking them back in some way to something negative. But when you look at Harrenhal, every woman at Harrenhal is called a witch queen, like or a sorceress or a witch or a woods witch or bathing in blood. It's constant. So when you look at the fact that where you said Harrenhal is located on the God's Eye next to the Trident and how those are important places for the First Men, this may be like a long-running thing throughout history, long before the Andals, that there were like powerful women that did rule from the God's Eye or on the shores of it or from the Trident. So that would make sense why when you have this character, like George included that line about Shara, the Witch Queen, and then all of a sudden we get a real one. Well, everyone clearing the Riverlands remembers this story about her because they use the same name. She seems to be doing the same thing. And it's kind of a cool thing. Like we know at the end of the Mystery Night, I think, that White Walls gets taken down and the Butterwells are basically gone in like 20 years. How many times could that have happened on the shores of the God's Eye over the course of history? So this may be like a constant running thing. There's always been witches or like ghosts of high heart like figures near the God's Eye.
It really feels like the center of the universe for all the magical things, all the witchy figures.
Yeah.
And all those qualities we see running through the main characters in the series too. Daenerys is rumored to bathe in the blood of virgins.
You got it too.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect example of like the things people are saying about Daenerys is a great example of how this works. Is that none of them, almost nobody in or in Westeros has met her yet, and they're all just hearing things.
People even say stuff like that about Sansa.
That's true.
Fair.
Yeah, that's true. People are thinking like all the rumors about how she killed Joffrey and turned into a bat. I mean, what?
Yeah, from her went blood. It's like it's another Harrenhal connection. It's weird.
Yeah, Harrenhal coming up again. It's interesting that way. Harrenhal, yeah. This. You guys could see here why we think there's a lot of Endgame vibes here. You got like the rise of magic. You've got the God's Eye. You've got Harrenhal, which is this incredible, creepy place. So yeah, there's a lot of juice to dig into here. So let's talk about some of that. Let's just talk about some of this Endgame stuff, just as an overview.
Talk about some of that juice.
Some of that juice. I'm starting to talk like
you bite into that hard juice.
Yeah, some juice.
I'm starting to talk like gray area. That's what she likes to do.
Get us through the long night.
That's right, my sweet summer children. I love her voice. So how strong history? That's, of course, reading Lauren's essay was a big part of why I thought she'd be perfect for this episode. And Joe, you're I always call you Joe. Everybody does that. Your name is Matt, but whatever.
Go for it.
But
it's Joe. It's really Joe.
But you have some, because you're doing this How Strong video. Now, we're not going to, give away all the stuff about your video. We want to encourage people to watch it separately. But it's, of course, very relevant to this. So this also made you perfect for this video as well. Now, what do you think about, let's get your takes. You've done the most research on the genetics and the bloodlines here. What do you think about Alys Rivers' possible ancestry, her connections to Strongs, and, as you will probably say, Starks? You can explain all that. This is really good. Now, one caveat first. What we're told is that she's either a daughter of Lionel or maybe even older. Our friend Nina Friel suggests she might be a descendant of Lucamore Strong's bastards, but I think you also have a theory in line with that. So, fire away.
Oof. So the thing about the Strongs is they have like more bastards per capita than like any house we see except for like Robert Baratheon himself. They just leave kids everywhere. They don't care.
The seed is strong.
The seed is strong. Whoa, that's the title of my video.
My goodness.
Wow. But when you look at just how the spread of them, in Fire and Blood in particular, we didn't know where Lucamore's kids went, his 16 kids. But we're told in Fire and Blood they went to Storm's End, Driftmark, Harrenhal, the Wall, and then also the Silent Sisters. So if you just look at the map, the Strong just went everywhere.
That's everywhere.
When characters start showing up that have like weird first men, old god connections, or they're particularly huge, or they're particularly what's the word I'll use? Lusty. It's very possible that they could be a Strong because like it's hard to outproduce them. It's like Frey levels of kids being thrown around the Seven Kingdoms.
Oh God, no.
Well,
and you mentioned earlier castles disappearing, right? And the Strong's castle is one of them. We don't know. They're clearly
have no
prominent.
idea where they're from. Literally no idea. You can guess, but the main problem is that the trident moves. And their sigil is the trident itself. So where it is now may not be where they built it, considering how old they are. It could be anywhere in the Riverlands at this point, because just where the rivers can go. And so when you look at Alys Rivers, I mean, she very clearly could be a bastard of like Lionel Strong, but he spent most of his time in King's Landing, so that doesn't seem likely.
Okay.
Lucamore's makes sense too, because they sent a bunch of Lucamore's kids back to Harrenhal, sure, but it could be literally any of them. And with her old god connections, and then when we see with like maybe like sort of glamours or these really long-lived like maybe like children human hybrid things, it's like if she really is like super old, like Melisandre old, like who knows, she could be one of these like very magical figures that's just hanging out near the trident for like centuries. It doesn't have to be the just a bastard child of the Strongs. Like she could be like an original Strong, maybe. You never know with how the old gods magic works.
Yeah, I think you guys will see, you're already seeing some of this, but throughout this episode, we already mentioned Melisandre, Shiera Seastar, Danelle Austin, but you'll also see some Bloodraven vibes, and definitely the Ghost of Highheart. That's another one that's going to come up pretty big. Okay, so Lauren, let's get some of your takes here. Let's talk about some of these tropes as they come from the in-world sources. Mushroom and Septon Eustace. Very often, everything we hear about the Dance of the Dragons and a few other places, it's a battle of sources between Eustace and Mushroom. And here is one of those points where they really differ, but they're both diving into sort of recognized tropes. At one point, Eustace calls Alys Rivers a woods witch, and at another point, he calls her a simple-minded slattern, which that doesn't work. You can't be a woods witch and simple-minded, right? So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how the term woods witch is used. We hear about woods witches in A Song of Ice and Fire, and they're somehow distinct from the other witches we hear about. Of course, the witch queens and the priestesses and all of that. It seems to be the lesser of witches in terms of status, like the association with nature is almost like the association of bastards with nature. I think it's especially interesting in Alys's case with her bastard names Rivers. It kind of hammers that home a little bit. But time and again in the series, we see that nature is incredibly powerful and not to be underestimated. So,
natural children. Right, they're called natural children. Oh, wow,
they
great.
Are.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting with the accounts from Septon Eustace and Mushroom. That's one of my favorite parts of Fire and Blood. How it's written like that. We get all these different accounts because that's how history is. And we get Septon Eustace's account, which is kind of the dismissive view of women, like, you know, nothing to really fear, nothing to watch out for, you know, just don't even consider it. And then Mushroom is, you know, generating that sensationalism, that fear of the powerful woman. And that's exactly what we see in our own history too.
Yeah. And of course, Mushroom exaggerates everything. So it's kind of in line with his thing, but it doesn't mean he's not doing, you know, falling right into a trope here. His accounts are so fun. I would love to. One of these days, we'll have to just gather all of Mushroom's accounts and kind of try to read it as a whole. That would be pretty fun.
That's gonna be rated M.
Yeah,
sure.
Rated M. M for Mushroom.
Yes, that's
right. We got there.
Okay, so Joe Magician, you also have some takes on these sources. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, jumping on what Lauren was saying, the way they use woods witches is kind of derogatory. I think it's sort of like the word barbarian or the word savage, where it's a way of marking somebody outside your culture and also primitive at the same time, which from an Andal perspective, the First Men definitely are, especially old god worshippers. So on one hand, it's kind of giving you like a coloring of the character for how the rest of the world is seeing her. But the simple-minded thing is something I talked about in my latest video, the Pyres and Blood, when I was talking about Mad King Aerys and Mad Arion and Mad Aegon, where it's like they're not actually mad mostly. Like Aerys was mad for other things, but not for like the weird visions and stuff like that. And that kind of happens quite a lot, where these characters that are called like crazy, simple, mad, it's not that they are those things, it's that what they understand the rest of the people can't see because it's a fantasy world.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like a code word, meaning that look deeper, reader.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Good point. And we know, and with George, people should already be on guard with that. Like, yeah, you're like, there's probably more to this. That's a good attitude to have in general.
It's like what was the other one? Bookish. A Targaryen that's bookish is actually reading prophecy and magic. That's what it almost always means.
They're a nerd.
Nerd.
Yeah. One of us.
Yeah, one of us. Yes, exactly. And now, so more of these tropes and related topics come up with the descriptions of her physically, and this is where we start to see some of the Mother and Maiden and Krone stuff, just the beginnings of it. There's more of it to come. But here's another quote about how she's seen. Alys Rivers was at least 40 years of age during the Dance of the Dragons. That much is known. Mushroom makes her even older. All agree that she looked younger than her years, but whether this was simple happenstance or achieved through her practice of the dark arts, men continue to dispute. Whatever her powers, it would seem Daemon Targaryen was immune to them, for little is heard of this supposed sorceress, whilst the prince held Harrenhal. And Ashaya's got some art of Aemond and Alys here on the back of Vhagar.
By the lovely Naomi Makes Art.
Yes, Naomi Makes Art. Very talented, very skilled. This is a great
Very prolific, too.
Very prolific. You can see Alys's pregnancy here, too, which is a nice touch.
And as it happens, if she's over 40 years of age, it is unusual to have a child at that age, but certainly not impossible. That happens even back then, but even in equivalent medieval times, it's possible for it to happen. So it doesn't necessarily speak to magic, but it is a little suspicious.
Yeah, I agree. That's well said. Now, as far as her looks and background, you touched on a little of this already, Matt, but let's fill out the rest of this. And you wrote in we have it written in the document here. Matt talks for 45 minutes straight, then passes out. But we're trying to keep it a little shorter than that.
Just starts reading my own essay that I'm going to make into a video. But one thing about that's important about Alys Rivers, particularly as a strong, is that she does get the traditional like First Men looks. She has the long flowing black hair. She's not particularly noted as like a great beauty, and that's one of the things that confuses quite a lot of characters. They're like, what is Aemon doing? Why is he in love with this woman so much? But then you look at the other strongs, and that seems to have happened too. Like Lucamore and Breakbones were not like super handsome men, but Lucamore had 3 different wives, 16 children. Breakbones ended up basically married to the realm's delight in Rhaenyra Targaryen, one of the most beautiful women in those kingdoms. And again, with like Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar, it seems to be there's something like kind of ancient and primal about them that seems to attract people sometimes. And then we look at the way she's described and the sigil of House Strong in their name. It really displays their connections to nature. They literally wear the river on their chest. And as we were talking about, they're magical, their life, they're an important part of how civilizations start, and they're walking around with it. So it really shows a deep connection of her to the children of the forest and the old gods and a different way of life. And that's kind of what really stands out in Fire and Blood, is she is so different from everyone else we're seeing. A lot of times the maesters that were writing it would sort of gloss over these weird characters. Like Tyenna the Tower gets some stuff, but it's like, okay, we're just going to move past that. But Alys clearly fascinated the fake writer that was writing about her, and it's because of all these weird first men old god things. It's like she's a living embodiment of like a weirwood, basically.
And you know, I love the way they wrote this part here. Like, oh, Daemon must have been immune to her powers. Like, so many assumptions there. One, that she was trying to get him. Two, that he, you know, that she would even have this kind of power. And two, that, yeah, like maybe he just wasn't into her. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're going to talk about this in a little second when we get to the witch archetype section. But it's interesting how you usually see witches in these three different forms. You know, she's either the seductive, enchanting witch, or this evil stepmother witch, or the Krone Witch with a prophecy. And Alys Rivers is kind of like a combination of all three at times. Not so much the evil stepmother one, but she is a mother. But she possesses qualities of the seductive witch and the Krone Witch, who tells prophecies. And I think it's that she's seductive not because of her beauty, but because of her power.
Yes.
To, you know,
Definitely.
just that sheer power. And that's something that everybody wants.
It's like she's a mysterious dark forest, like walking around, basically.
Yeah.
Like the wolves would almost, if it was like a person.
Yeah, I think that is
like
what
that.
Aemond, later when Aemond and Cole are rumored to have fought over her, that's kind of what was in my mind too. And not only her power, but the fact that both of those guys, even though Kristen Cole's an adult man, he's in the Kingsguard from pretty young, so neither of those two have much experience with women. You know, that's always, whereas Daemon did. So I think that, you know, like the real world, like who's more likely to be besotted, you know, because it's like their first real relationship or something like that. And then you factor in the power, and that just turns it up to 10 or 11, like George loves to do. So it's a very not standard, but kind of the way George likes to build things. He gives real grounding, but then he uses the magic and the rumor and all this to dial it up to another level. So it's great. I love it. And of course, like we said earlier, there's Shiera and Melisandre and Danelle Lawston, all of whom look younger than their age. All of whom, in Melisandre's case, they don't say bathe in blood, but we have more proof of her actually being younger than she is than the other two, who it's just rumors. And interestingly, Danelle is Lady of Harrenhal until about, you know, it's about 230-ish, which is almost 100 years later. So there's a little, like, maybe you get once a century, you get like a witch at Harrenhal or something. I don't know. But yeah, let's talk about the triple witch archetypes. This was the part of your essay that really got me going, that really, like, I was already really enjoying it. But when I saw this, and you in her essay, she lists all the archetypes and then sort of does a checkbox next to which characters in A Song of Ice and Fire kind of line up with that. And I had the same realization. I saw that. I was like, wait, doesn't Alys check off all three of these? That's so cool. She's everything. And then later, Joe, you know, with Joe talking about all these things that she has to do with all the different magic disciplines and all the different bloodlines. This is why I have Bloodraven vibes from her, because she's just so many things at once. But anyway, please explain this triple witch archetype
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not my idea about witches having these three sub-archetypes. It goes back way, way back, thousands of years, to Greek mythology and Hecate, the triple form goddess who could assume the form of a maiden, a mother, or a crone, and had all these other she was also like the goddess of the underworld and the heavens and the earth. So there's a lot of power in the number 3, and especially when we talk about it in terms of a witch archetype, that number 3, you know, it represents the different phases of a woman's life: youth, motherhood or middle age, and then old age or the crone. And those are the 3 female aspects that we see in the Faith of the Seven. What a coincidence, right? It was absolutely intentional on George R.R. Martin's part. But when we consider the witch characters in Westeros, it's really interesting to consider the witch archetype in greater literature, in Greek and Roman myth, like I mentioned, and fairy tales, Shakespeare. There's all this groundwork in literature that tells us what makes a witch, and why she's important when she appears in a story. These are things I talk about in depth in my essay in Triple Aspect, Witches of Macbeth and A Song of Ice and Fire. I take kind of a Shakespearean lens approach to the witches in A Song of Ice and Fire, and look at the parallels between mostly the witch archetypes in Macbeth and ASOIAF. But we can even just isolate the witch characters that we see in ASOIAF and have a huge conversation about all the things that they represent and the different sub-archetypes into which they manifest: the subversion of the maiden, the mother, and the crone. So I keep talking about this, so let me explain it. So basically, the witch maiden subverts the beauty and charm of the normal maiden into seduction and enchantment, because we have all these witches in literature that, like I mentioned, that are seductive and enticing with their beauty. And there's Melisandre, who's a perfect example of that. And let's see. And Alys Rivers, although it's somewhat different because her age is, you know, kind of to be determined.
Yeah, it's a wide range. Yeah.
Right. And then we have the mother witch, who the mother is normally a very nurturing figure in, you know, in literature, in the Faith of the Seven. And the mother witch subverts those nurturing qualities so that she is this sort of evil, poisonous stepmother kind of character. I think that Lady Stoneheart is a perfect example of that. We already have a lot of Catelyn haters in the fandom, but I'm in the Catelyn did no wrong.
None of us are haters here.
No, but it's interesting to think about why, you know, because they do see her in that sort of evil stepmother sort of figure to Jon. Mm-hmm. And then when she becomes Lady Stoneheart, it's like validating of that point of view. And Cersei, to a certain extent, also is like a mother witch to Sansa. And that's really interesting to take that perspective on her. I know Pat Spinagle wrote a great essay on Cersei's possible view as a witch. Like some of these characters in Fire and Blood, some of these female characters in Fire and Blood are rumored to be witches. He has a lot to say about Cersei as a witch. So you should check that out on Watchers on the Wall. But the other sub-archetype that we have is the Krone Witch. And that's the one that I think most of us are most familiar with. She's the one with all the prophetic power. The wisdom, the typical wisdom of the crone that, you know, you trust. You go to the old lady, the old Nan type character for the good advice that's never wrong. But the Krone Witch gives you these prophecies that you think you know what's going to happen, but it doesn't exactly turn out that way. Like Miri Mazdur, and Melisandre is also a bit Krone Witch too. She embodies both the Maiden Witch and the Krone Witch figure. Okay, so that's a lot of information to take in. But, so what does this all mean? You know, okay, so that's great. And it's great that we can sort all these characters, but what's it mean? I think that the purpose of this subversion in literature of this female archetype, in myth and fairy tales, it's kind of changed over time. maybe originally it might have been to alert people to the bad woman, you know, especially in fairy tales, you know, like the witch who, like in Hansel and Gretel, the witch who takes in Hansel and Gretel and promises them candy and ends up trying to cook them for dinner or something like that. These fairy tales have like been trying to teach us about the badness of these women. But in fact, it's interesting to read some stories and find out the witch's perspective of things, or to see the archetype flipped a little bit, or to see that it's not so two-dimensional. The witch has actually become really important to women because of her power. You know, women didn't have a lot of power historically, especially in medieval settings, like A Song of Ice and Fire.
That's a great segue, actually, because I wanted to add something here that's been occurring to me while we've been talking about this, which is that Alys, there's another theme in play with her that isn't really a woman, isn't really a gendered trope at all. It's just a power corrupts trope, which is, you pointed out how she's George is kind of inverting the witch mother trope by actually having her be she was a wet nurse. That was her kind of upbringing. So she's actually quite tender with children. But as we see, by the time she becomes the quote unquote witch queen, she's turned into kind of a vicious figure. She has maybe become something different. Maybe she's become corrupted by her own power, maybe being her association with Aemond, having bearing the heir to the throne has changed her outlook. So I wonder if that's a big part of, do you see that maybe happening as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. You know, there doesn't necessarily have to be a child involved, although it is like, you know, a big clue that this is a witch mother or a mother witch figure. But, you know, what about just the people that you hold power over? Those are kind of your children in a way. Like Daenerys thinks of her people as her children.
True. Yeah. There's also a cool thing that George does where traditionally in the myths where these witches come from, like the Greek fates or the Norse Norns, as they're known, they're usually not part of things. It was really... people like Shakespeare and others took these mythological figures and pulled them into real people, like with Macbeth, the three witches. And George really loves playing with that idea, taking that further, where in a really ancient story, Alice Rivers would be like one of the fates, like maybe like all three, maybe a Hecate figure. Instead, she's seizing the power for herself. That they don't usually do that. They're kind of like, what's the right term for this? They're like underpinnings of the universe, basically. Like they don't have choice. Right. They're just manifestations of time and fate that has to happen. George wants them to be people instead. It's really cool.
Oh, that's a great take. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, they're more removed. They're more distant from it. And the witches that we see in A Song of Ice and Fire, they're much more interactive.
Right. If you ask the fates something, every time someone asks the fates something in Greek myth, it goes horribly wrong for them. You never ask the fates advice ever.
I wonder. We're going to get into a little of that too, because we're in the second half of this episode. We're going to speculate a little bit on what some of the things she might have prophesied. Because that's what we know she gave these prophecies, but what they were, there's not very much detail on her actual predictions. But I have a few guesses. We'll get to that later. But I want to throw something else out here right now, which is, thinking of her and this whole nurturing element, it's said that she gathered like a lot of these broken men from around her. You know, it was winter during, the Dance of the Dragons had just happened, so the realm was shredded, and again, winter. So it's just it's bad. Like the realm is in a bad state, and so by bringing these people to Harrenhal, she was kind of taking care of them. She was forming a new kingdom and bringing all these broken people together and giving them a place to live so they could survive the winter and et cetera. So I guess there's a little of that in there as well.
True.
Super
yeah,
chat.
it's never exciting when you play the archetype, when you play the trope straight. Like, don't play it straight. Give it... Make it a little bit spicy.
Yep, that's George. We know that, right? So, super chat from LML. Hey, buddy. By the way, if y'all missed his birthday stream on Sunday, Sanrixian and others threw together an amazing stream that was super fun. So check that out if you get the chance. including photoshops and songs,
Costumes
and stories.
Lots of costumes.
It was really something. This is
Lots of sunglasses.
Yeah, one of the most unique live streams I've ever been a part of. Or ever seen. Forget the being part of it part. Just any of it. So he says, very happy with all the witch talk. Joey McWizards and Shakes are wonderful guests. Well, I definitely agree with that.
That name has gone further than I ever thought. That was like a one-line joke. Months later, it's still here.
Joey McWizards. I love it. And Matthias C says, Super Chat says, sorry, I'm a poor son of a witch. You know, we appreciate the wordplay around here. Now, of course, as we've said here, mentioned a couple times, this whole bathing in blood thing comes up. Now, there's other non-literal bathing in bloods that come up as well, which is one of our introductions to Alys Rivers, which is Aemond, who hates the Strongs because, you know, they kind of usurped his family in his mind, and one of them cut out his eye. And so, of course, when he captures a castle full of Strongs, it's kind of predictable that this happens. One by one, every man and boy with strong blood in his veins was dragged forth and put to death until the heap made of their heads stood 3 feet tall. Thus did the flower of House Strong, an ancient line of noble warriors boasting descent from the first men, come to an ignoble end in the ward at Harrenhal. No true-born Strong was spared, nor any bastard, save Alys Rivers. Though the wet nurse was twice his age, thrice if we put our trust in Mushroom, Prince Aemond had taken her into his bed as a prize of war soon after taking Harrenhal, seemingly preferring her to all the other women of the castle, including many pretty maids of his own years. So if we want to make this not fantastical, maybe he just, you know, like we said before, he was into the power thing.
Yeah, I mean, what it makes me think about is, I mean, obviously with the idea that she was a Strong herself, well, maybe they didn't treat her that well. She was a bastard. She hated them. She told them as much. And she was like, look, I'm on board with you doing all of this. And they got along, and chemistry and sparks started to fly. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
possible. Otherwise,
maybe it points to she actually wasn't a strong bastard, and that's why she wasn't killed.
Oh, that's possible. Yeah. So, Joe, you have some notes here. Tell us what you think here.
The thing I really liked about this scene when I read it through, and then after I reread it for my when I was researching my video, is that this is probably what's happened to the Strongs like over and over and over again, with just how often they produce bastards. Like they've probably been wiped out like 100 times officially, but then someone like Alys Rivers pops back up, fills the place, still keeps the bloodline going, because the first men don't really have the same kind of understanding of primogeniture, and that largely came with the Andals. They had a very different understanding of what it meant to be the different class structures of bastards and trueborns. Like they had tons of bastards. The Lord's first night was specifically to produce lots of them. Yes. So the Macers think they were gone, but clearly Alys doesn't think they're gone, and she claimed what was lost by her brethren.
That's good. Yeah, well said. Lauren, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really, just except it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, how, you know, she's like a really enticing woman despite her old age. She has this great power, and it's
her old age.
You know, her old age, or I don't know.
Yes.
See, in my mind, when I was reading it, I did picture her as older. We kept like panning back to stories, back and forth in Fire and Blood, and then we come back to Alys Rivers. I'm like, oh my goodness, she's still around. And I'm so pleased because I want to know more about her. But yeah, it just speaks to her power as a woman.
And to speaking to what you said, Joe, about the Strong just keep coming back. Well, I mean, what says a house that won't die like a literal walking dead man named Robert Strong? I mean,
it's why that this is something I figured out while I was reading. It's like, that's why this makes sense, that you could have a random huge guy show up and say he's a Strong, and everyone's just kind of like, all right, this has happened many, many, many times. Tons of strong bastards just show up and decide they're now trueborn, and now they're the lords. Yep. That's basically why it makes sense to everybody at court.
And if they have enough going for them, you know, that tends to work out. You know, like a popular bastard with an army at his or her back has a lot more chance to move up in the world. Looks like a super chat from Sanrixian.
She has no comment yet, though. She did it twice.
Oh, well, thanks, Sanrixian. Well,
so I don't know if she had a message for us, but I'll keep an eye out for that in the chat.
I imagine it was something very witchy.
It's mysterious.
It was an artistic comment of some kind. So this is next. The next phase here is maybe Aemond and Alys have a little bit of time together, maybe off page, I guess we could call it. And soon after, Kristen Cole's army arrives, and Aemond and Cole kind of have maybe not a falling out, but they don't agree on what to do, so they kind of end up agreeing to disagree and just splitting. Aemond goes his way, does his thing, Cole goes his way. And I wonder if Alys Rivers was part of these discussions, because they both seem to value her, and if she had revealed her foretelling abilities, well, if you're planning a war, having someone who can see the future is pretty useful.
Absolutely. Definitely agree with that.
And I wonder if this didn't burn Aemond later. This is kind of what I was talking about with the prophecies, right? He boasts about how she sees Daemon in all these, in a storm cloud, and in the fires that we cooked our dinner, and in the water, and all these, in the clear blue lake or whatever. Song of Ice and Fire is full of people misinterpreting prophecies. You wonder if either Alys and or Aemond, it would be both of them, expected him to defeat Daemon in this big showdown that they have. And what do you guys think about that? Do you think that there's a potential for more of that here, or maybe there's something else going on? Lauren, why don't you go first?
I'm actually going to defer to Joe first. It's been a little while, so I need a bit of a refresher. Okay, so it'd be like that thing where you let other people order while you decide what you want to order.
Yes.
Okay, so Joe, you go ahead then.
So the thing that I sort of paralleled to while I was reading this was sort of like maybe like a Tyanna of the Tower or a Melisandre between Davos and Stannis kind of situation, where Davos doesn't like Melisandre, but he is enticed by her, and she is trying to seduce him, which may be kind of what's going on with Cole. From a different perspective, you could maybe see Davos and Stannis fighting over Melisandre, even though internally we know Davos isn't actually. So that could be kind of what's going on. But I especially like the idea of Tyanna and Maegor versus Aemond and what was that?
That was me
Punching
hitting
the
the
microphone.
microphone. I was just like, God, this just makes me so mad. I just gotta destroy our microphone.
Just gotta punch stuff.
Yeah, that was it.
How Maegor of you. But yeah, like Tyanna is, although she enabled some of Maegor's worst parts of his personality, and in other parts he was like his best counselor, and sort of kind of held it together after Visenya died, but not really. But she did like the best job, and that's sort of what we see Alys doing here for Aemond, because he's really an out of control asshole, like Maegor style. Yeah. And she sort of takes the role of like being like a weird, creepy mother figure that he never kind of had. Yeah, but it's weird and creepy because it's Aemond and it's the Targaryens, and that's kind of what they do.
It never goes right, does it? It's interesting how we have these pairings of these men who desire power with these powerful and promising women, and this whole wish fulfillment thing, it just doesn't really work out for them.
Nope. Tyanna poisoning all the whatever she actually did to hurt Maegor, it's probably the same sort of thing that we're going to talk about later, but probably what Alys was doing to Aemond, helping him in a way that helps her more.
So we have maybe some other endgame symbolism here that I took note of, maybe major symbolism. We have a knight and a sapphire-eyed villain fighting over a magical woman with special bloodlines, which is to me, that's like Prince That Was Promised, like the Pact vibes, maybe. Maybe a stretch, but it made me think of that. So there's something maybe going on there. But Lauren, you have some notes here on the Maiden Witch and the Krone Witch, and how that is the way you write it, maybe symbolic for a particular crisis that's going on in the story.
Right.
You explain this. I'm not doing a very good job of it.
No, it's all right. Something I wanted to mention as well while we're talking about these pairings of witches and men who are desiring power, is it's interesting to think about the specific witch qualities that these women have in a psychoanalytical light. A lot of times when we analyze literature, you can tie in a lot of psychoanalysis, like what the character really wants and what's happening with the character's psychology at the time. So Alys is like enticing like the Maiden Witch and has all these prophetic powers like the Krone Witch. And in my essay, I talk a little bit about how we can see those witch archetypes, sub-archetypes, as representing a crisis for characters that they're tied with in the story. For example, the Maiden Witch can be seen to symbolize a crisis of passion versus dispassion, like, you know, what side do I choose? Should I do this? Should I do that? In the main series, we see that a lot with Stannis and Melisandre, and him choosing what's more important, and choosing to use the magical prophecies to further his battles. And then the Krone Witch symbolizes a crisis of knowledge versus uncertainty. Like the Krone Witch is the one with the prophetic powers that we're not quite sure we can believe, or that we can interpret really well, because this is the human realm down here trying to interpret, you know, the prophecies. And I think that's exactly what's going on with Westeros at this point in the story, not just these characters, is that crisis of passion versus dispassion, choosing one side or another over another, and knowledge and uncertainty. It's just a big mess. And I think that these witches are, a witch like Alys Rivers is a really good kind of character anchor for all of that simmering cauldron.
So if you think that she shows the crisis, the Maiden Witch shows the passion versus dispassion, and Krone Witch is knowledge versus uncertainty, what would be the central dichotomy of the Mother Witch? That's not exactly what we're talking about there, but I was curious what your perspective was on that.
It's, oh gosh, you know what? I need to
Goes to read own essay.
Let me read what I wrote in my essay, because I actually didn't write this in the notes. This is funny. When Aziz asked me to do this last night, I was like, oh crap, I need to read my essay and see what exactly I said.
You do that all the time. We go back to our old episodes. Let's listen to this thing from 4 years ago.
Well, we've got something we can talk about for just a second.
No.
You got it?
I've got it. Yeah, the Mother Witch causes a crisis of attachment versus independence. For example, and I was talking about Cersei as a Mother Witch at this point in the essay, and Sansa coming into her own after surviving Cersei. A lot of times when we see characters attached to the Mother Witch figure, after they come away from that Mother Witch figure, like, you know, Cinderella and her evil stepmother, they experience this point of independence in their arc. So I mean, Cinderella in an arc, I'm not sure how far. You can go there.
Cinderella arc.
Cinderella
just
arc.
One word, yeah. That's a great take. I wonder too about how this, well, maybe speak just for a second on how this is kind of a double leveled thing here, with Cersei sort of being a witchish figure to Sansa a bit, but she was impacted by a real witch as far as that goes, with Maggie the Frog, who is telling her that a younger, more beautiful queen will cast her aside. So Cersei's sitting there looking at Sansa like, oh, this is a very beautiful young girl who's married to my son. She's going to become queen, so how can she not recognize that this is the prophecy?
Right. It's almost like she's caught in this cycle that she can't break out of, but she kind of started it by going for that knowledge in the first place, getting that prophecy. And it's royally fucked her up for her life.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of funny too. It's a crone warning the mother about a maiden.
That's crazy. Oh my goodness.
Oh man, George is. See, this to me, this is when I read the triple witch thing, and I was like, wow, George just kind of threw that in there. It's to me, it's like asking an amazing. Since I have a background in guitar, this is why I think of it this way. It's like it's like you ask a really, really, really amazing guitarist to just rip off a guitar solo. He can just do it. It's like really amazing. And anyone will be impressed by that, just about. But a guitarist will be a little more impressed by it because they know exactly, maybe have a better sense of just how hard it is to learn to do that, and they can break it down and analyze the notes and all that stuff that's happening. George just made this amazing sort of literary funky thing. I don't even know what to call it. Just throw it into this history book. To me, it's like, I'm going to make a guitar solo here. Show everybody how awesome I am.
Literary analysis is incredible. I mean, a lot of times when you're reading a book and you can't quite explain what in the story doesn't work for you, a lot of times, they're just, the author just isn't thinking as hard and incorporating as much of these archetypes and inverting them, subverting them, whatever you do.
Yeah.
But George does. He knows his mythology. He knows his Shakespeare and, gosh, a whole bunch of other stuff. It's amazing how much literary influence goes into A Song of Ice and Fire.
It's like, to me, one of the ways I want to think about it is everyone's subconscious is very active when they're reading in ways we don't know it. And a really good author not only knows this, but knows how to speak to your subconscious as well as your active mind.
I think
it's your literary subconscious.
I also think it speaks to like how he couldn't write this magnum opus until he was older and he's had the reading. He
50
can do
plus
that.
years of life
I don't
experience.
think he could have written anything near with this much depth and references and stuff like that.
Because these things are in his head. That's why they're easy for him. It's like, just using the guitar analogy again, it's like, we've played 1 million guitar solos. Guitar solos are easy. So he's just thought about these things over and over and over for decades. And so they kind of come like second nature.
Well, yeah, because he read Shakespeare a lot when he was younger. He also read Lord of the Rings and Lovecraft as like a young teen. So he's been turning these things over in his head for like 40 years. No, like 50 years by the time he started.
Yeah,
that's a great point too. Super chat from LML. Aemond has for 666, of course. Aemond has a star sapphire in his eye, like the rider of the Ice Dragon, and compares to Euron, one blue eye. He has night black armor, Night King type. Yeah, this is exactly what I meant.
Right now on the screen, I have some art by Naomi Makes Art.
Cool.
That is of Aemond one eye.
With
exactly what
armor.
he's talking about, and the black armor.
Very perfect. So. Right on the nose. And this is kind of what I was getting at with the princess that was promised, pact stuff. Endgame stuff, maybe an ice dragon fighting. I would assume Daenerys on Drogon. Maybe that's a thing that happens near the end of the whole series. Lots of potential there. And so with Aemond having the star sapphire is just really poignant. Plus Dark Sister driven through his eye. I think that's pretty huge. Not only that, we have Kristen Cole. After he leaves Aemond, he does this bizarre march where he marches through these scenes of dead people, which to me is just, hello, that's the army of the dead foreshadowing in the Riverlands. Does anyone else feel the same way or different?
Definitely. I got a lot of Night's Queen vibes from Alys in particular. Like she's not literally a corpse queen. We're not really sure what that means. If it means the Night's Queen was actually a corpse or she was the queen of corpses. But everywhere around Harrenhal, like you're saying, it's like a forest of dead people that everyone's walking through. The amount of death she rains down is pretty impressive and kind of evil. Yeah, I'm not sure. It depends on that perspective.
Yeah, and Aemond is actually raining down death with his dragon all through the Riverlands while she's sitting there kind of holding the fort, I suppose. I guess we hear that Sabbath Frey comes and takes Harrenhal, but then Aemond comes back and Sabbatha has to hide in the privy while Dragonfire rains around. That's what Harren should have done. He should have thought of hiding in a privy. Silly man. Yeah. Lauren, do you have any takes on this Night Queen vibe stuff, or the Butcher's Ball?
No, not exactly. Actually, guys, I do have to duck out now.
Okay, we're at that point.
It is perfect timing because I'm going to let you guys take it from here. And I'll be excited to catch up with it later. I actually have an orchestra rehearsal to go to.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming. Your takes were awesome. I hope
nice to have you on. We'll definitely have her on again.
Yes, absolutely.
You definitely should. Lauren's the best.
Please give
now
everyone...
you're leaving us with just Matt the Gathering.
The trolling came. Now I actually have to talk. I was enjoying listening to her monologue. I love talking. I love listening to her
You're
talk
not
about
off the hook anymore.
Yeah.
Well, please remind everybody where to find you again on Twitter and on your blog and all that, and we'll say adios.
Right. You can find me at Shakes of Thrones on Twitter, and on my blog, you can find me at shakespeareofthrones.com.
Awesome. Well, please, everybody, check that out. Read the essay. It was awesome for me to read, and I hope we've... and
I'm
also on YouTube. I also have a Shakespeare of Thrones.
Are you going to be at Con of Thrones this year?
I am.
Then people will see you there, too.
I meant to ask you that, I forgot.
You're going to be at Ice and Fire? I didn't realize you were at Ice and Fire Con. So we're going to be seeing you in about a little over a month. Like 6 weeks. Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. We get to watch Game of Thrones together. Very cool.
Yay. Yeah, that's very cool.
All right. Well, we'll see you soon. Thanks again for coming. This was awesome. And on behalf of everybody, we'll see you next time.
All right. See you. Thanks for having me on again.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. So that's a good spot to do our mid-roll shout out real quick here.
Thingamajig and
Yeah.
For everyone to clear out because she's gone.
Yeah, everyone's going to leave now that
now
she's
we've just
gone.
got Matt the Gathering here. It'll be the opposite of people gathering. Okay, I had
A
to
lot
get
of
it
people
in.
play Magic, Ashaya. Get over yourself.
Quite a few. It's what is
Yeah.
it like?
This house right here is a big Magic the Gathering house, as it happens.
Oh, there we go.
Sean's job, he's the manager at a game store for Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, Sean.
I definitely don't have a deck sitting right next to me with a
there we
skull
go.
on it. That's not a thing.
Yeah, Sean works for Super Games Inc. Free shout out for them there. They are
Yeah.
like the second or third largest online retailer of Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh. So he's yeah.
That's why we get. That's why we get so
mailboxes-
little of Sean on the show. Actually, is because he is so busy. He's a workaholic.
We get
for
so
gaming.
many packages of Magic cards in our mailbox for Sean.
I'm gonna need to hit up Sean then.
Yeah, you
do. I literally have a deck that is nothing but trees, and one of them looks like a weirwood.
Definitely hit up
He'll
Sean.
like that. He'll like
He's
that.
into that.
Okay, so thanks to our Blood Rider patrons, Vorsaki, wielder of a Valyrian Steel Arak with the Dragonbone hilt, Kohel Koi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a Dragonbone bow, Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the Wildfire Whip Gehenna, and also shout outs to our Northern champions. Let's take care of them today. J. Wilson Winters King, Sir Stephen the Hammer of the
There's a
North.
fire outside in someone's car.
Whoa.
Anyway, it's our roommate. I don't know. I just see clearly like a fire. I'm gonna get up.
No
and
harm,
look
no
at that. You
foul.
continue reading this.
Sir Stephen, the Hammer of the North, Winter's King, Lord of the First Men, Lady Ardross, Mother of Wolves, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Claymore Manticore. Sir Brian the Returned is Knight of the Last House, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Blade Red Song. Sir Kobe of House Stonesmith, words are wind, deeds are stone. Lady Cat Jones of the Big Pond is wielder of the Valyrian Steel Blade Ginger's Honor. Jake Snow, aka Jacob Ice Eyes, is the Bastard of the Last River. Lord Darren of House Rambler, motto, the last hunt is ceaseless. Lady Bobby of House Mitchell, and last but not least, Bullweir the Purple of Heavenly Mythhead House Taurus. So is our house about to burn down?
No, Bill, our roommate has like a canister like on top of his engine that's full of fire. And it's not his engine on fire. I don't know. He's been working on his car.
A can of fire. I can see why that might be
fire.
useful, but is it dragonfire or wildfire?
I don't know, but it's not his actual engine that's on fire, but he does have the can of fire on top. I don't know. Maybe someone who knows cars knows this is the thing.
A can of fire is related to a can of whoop ass, I think. It's a very similar thing.
Oh my god. I hope it's not thermite. I hope he's not burning through his engine.
What he's doing anyways. I'll find out in an hour.
So another important factor here is the child of Aemond and Alys. Before we get to Aemon's fight with Daemon, let's talk about this kid that he leaves behind. It's kind of easy to miss it. This is a child of ice and fire. This is Aemond is, of course, a Targaryen. And Alys Rivers, if she has strong blood, which is likely...
By the way, she's from the Riverlands, and there's then intermarriage.
All sorts of first man
it
blood.
certainly seems like that seems very clear.
And there's
Especially by this time.
Yeah. And there's some theories that she's maybe descended from, she's got some Blackwood blood, or, there's a lot of possibilities for where her heritage could come from. But she's being from that general area, the odds of first men blood are nearly automatic. So there's, that's a pretty interesting thing to deal with her. Now, Joe, what do you think about her child?
Matt the Gathering, okay? Understand Rixian's memory by calling him by what she wants us to call him.
Is that what our super chats were for?
Yeah, it was for that. Yeah, it was exactly that.
So we've been paid to call you that.
We've been paid off,
yeah, we've been bribed to call you
paid me
Joe
twice.
the Gathering.
So I was like waiting. I was like, I need to do this organically.
Ready to pounce.
Come on.
Okay, JTG. Tell us what you think.
What you're talking about, the ice and fire, is pretty interesting, especially with the connections to the First Men, like the Starks likely marrying down to the Blackwoods at some point. If she is a Blackwood, then that would make sense. Kind of like how Bloodraven is much in the same way. Like you're talking about how she seems Bloodravenish. Well, yeah, they might have the same background, especially because House Blackwood is actually fairly close to Harrenhal. It's right along the Trident itself, down the Red Fork, I think, and not that far overland. So, like, it's very possible that even if Alys is a strong bastard, definitely could be a Blackwood too. She's probably a little bit of everything with the way the Strongs operate.
Yeah.
The thing I found really interesting about the quote about her kid is that at first first Alys says it's Aemon's bastard, but later she changes it and says, no, it's his true-born son, heir to the Seven Kingdoms. It's like, so did they get married? Did they get married in front of a heart tree? What's going on here?
There's certainly a heart tree at Harrenhal, so we know it's that creepy multiple with the one with Daemon slashed up multiple times. It has like a really a face of horror that Arya notices when she's there. So the tree was probably like, "What are y'all doing?
Just leave me alone, guys."
Who do you think you are? I do think you're right, though. I think that indicates that they got married. I mean, she could just be lying. It's entirely possible.
Totally could be lying. But, if she's claiming it, then I don't know. There's no way to double check it. And the other cool thing about it is that if they actually did get married, this is a thing that has happened many times before in the story.
Yeah.
We get Jace Velaryon, Secret Strong, who supposedly married Sarah Snow and maybe got her pregnant. We have Rhaegar and Lyanna, another example of that kind of thing.
And this is a Baratheon involved here too. We have a Targaryen who it's kind of inverted. Instead of the Targaryen, instead of the Stark running off with the Targaryen, we have the Targaryen running away from the Baratheon marriage, because Aemon was supposed to marry one of Boros's daughters. Famously, I could marry one, and Lucerys was not free to marry one of them. That obviously was pretty huge. So. But there's another little factor you discovered here amidst the language, right? With the naming conventions of certain families. I think some people know this one already. I know you're going to go into more detail of this in your videos. We're not going to spoil the whole game here, but just tell us the basics of the origin of these names here, Stark and Strong and all that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is something I did not come up with. This has been noticed in the fandom before, particularly from our friends that know German. Stark in German translate literally as strong. And I actually went on a little quest to figure out what happened during the translation, because when Robert Strong and Lucamore the Lusty show up in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, they're not called Stark, because they would be in the translation. Instead, they changed to Craft, which means power instead of strong. So it's not only it's like he's messing with his own translators. It's like, oh, you guys figure out what you're going to do with this. But it's like a sneaky way of showing a connection between the two families in the North and the South. I have a lot more connections that are really cool, but that's like the basic level one, that these families are kind of like maybe like the forks of the river trident. One went north, one stayed in the Riverlands, another one went south. Because especially with when you look at this, like, this is going to be a bad way to say it, the spray of Lucamore. If you're thinking about that happening for thousands of years, they would be everywhere, and their names are so simple. There's an interview where George was asked to give examples of like classic First Men names, and this is while he was writing Fire and Blood, I believe, on the timing of it. In the past, he's normally said like Stark and then a few others, but this time he said Stark, Strong, and Mud. So in his mind, those are the base level like First Men names, drawing an instant connection between them.
Which tells you just how old they are too. We talked about how they're probably really ancient, but we're talking like beginning, like one of the first houses.
Like Garth the Green old, like First Men coming over the arm of Dorne, like the First Men. As you can tell that especially from their sigil, it's so simple. Compared to the rest of the sigils we see, it's like it's them and House Massey that have like the two simplest sigils.
Oh yeah, they have the triple circle. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
The Strongs have the river, but the Masseys have the same color scheme and the same background, but it's going circular instead.
Right. So that's cool. Well, this is a good reason to check out Joe's video on How Strong, because there's a lot more of this. This is this is only a little part of it. There's more name stuff, more meta, and just all around good analysis. But
Aziz has already read it.
Yeah, I did. I got to read the document. I obviously couldn't watch the video because it's not out yet. But
yeah,
I got a preview, and it was very good. So
aren't you special? Jeez, don't even brag or anything.
Hang on, we sent her to a shit.
So we have, let's talk about the showdown between the two. This is, we talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about the result of it and some of the other implications. Interesting quote here. I want to get the exact text. Who told you where to find me? Daemon says. My lady, Aemon answered. She saw you in a storm cloud, in a mountain pool at dusk. In the fire we lit to cook our suppers. She sees much and more, my Alys. Now this is part of what we were getting at earlier, where she seems to be like in the Bloodraven vein of things, where she seems to be involved in multiple magic disciplines, because Melisandre can gaze into the flames, but who else has ever looked into a storm cloud for prophecy or a mountain pool at dusk. I don't know that. Do we have any other examples of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question. I can't think of anyone in particular that we know of them looking into other, the other elements, basically, because it gets into there, the whole, ice, fire, water,
Woods Witch, kind of natural,
and earth, because like we see the Rhoynar with their water magic, so like we clearly we've been led to believe that there is a water specific magic. Just like then that there is an more ice specific one and a more fire specific one. We don't see as much of like an earth, as it so happens.
It's more the children themselves.
Yeah, it's more the children themselves, I suppose. But Alys seems to be tapping into multiple of these. Is what it seems. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's also when you hear Bloodraven talk to Bran and describing like what his powers will be like, you get much of the same imagery where it's like you will fly through the sky, you will like touch stones, you will go underneath rivers and all that stuff. It seems like she's doing the same stuff.
I guess the earth kind of really is the werewood trees as well when I think about it. Like you were saying, the children of the forest, but like that is specifically like they're looking through in a different way, but looking through the earth and plants and whatnot to see things.
That's a really good point. Plus, there's some additional evidence here. We all know George loves wordplay. Well, he multiple times, I think it's at least twice, he uses the phrase "root out." Yes, referring to getting her out of Harrenhal.
Yeah, that one. The roots go deep, my friend.
Yeah, so when I saw it, I was like, roots out, eh? Yeah, so of course we're always on guard reading this passage. We've already got like a dude with a sapphire eye and the God's eye, and I was like, all right, we got to be really careful looking at this stuff, George. This is fertile ground for theories and prophecies and foreshadowing.
And was just thinking, there's also from the spoilers for Winds of Winter, the RN chapter, when they go into the Children of the Forest Cave, and they have all those faces carved from stone, like the Faceless Men, like copied that.
Yeah.
So maybe the children actually can see through rock. They carve a face in it, like they can with the trees.
So they have their duel over the God's Eye, and as we alluded to earlier, we wonder if Alys knew this would happen, or if she saw the prophecy wrong. One of my favorite, I have two really fun theory ideas that are, just kind of out there. I don't have super level of evidence for these, but they came to mind. One is that she mistakenly saw this wrong, either because later we're going to see that she has, quote, a dragon, and there's some. A lot of the theories are that she doesn't really have a dragon. She has a glamour dragon, and that the glamour might be built from Caraxes' body, because we know Caraxes crawled out of the God's Eye and died on the shore, not in the lake. So she would have, that's one of the things we hear is necessary for to have parts of the body to make the illusion more authentic. So it'd be really funny if she saw her own fake dragon in a vision and was fooled by that. But I think a better idea is that she may have, along with, this is a line of thinking that you've really taught me to do, Joe the Gathering, which is to think about these Targaryen dreams as foreshadowing for Daenerys. Like they see all the, like Arianne and Aerys, you taught me that their madness may have come from seeing Daenerys in their visions, and they thought it was themselves. So they were trying to jump into a pyre or become, do this stuff to become a dragon, which is really what happened to her. So along those same lines, maybe Alys saw a vision of two dragons fighting over the God's Eye, but it's really like Night King and Daenerys instead of Daemon and Aemond. So she just saw the wrong thing. So something along those lines. Does that make any sense to you, or do you have anything to add to that?
That makes a lot of sense. It doesn't even have to be, although it's most likely the story will end, or at least the war will end near the God's Eye and the Trident. That seems to be well foreshadowed. But it could be like, if we're talking about the books, if Fagon could actually mount a dragon and he fights Daenerys over King's Landing, that would be a similar scene too.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Aemon's flying around ravaging the Riverlands. It gives me Night King ravaging whatever vibes. I could see that happening.
But yeah, Matt the Gathering there does raise an interesting question as well coming up here. Just something that I was thinking about myself, which is what is Alys's actual emotional attachment to these people? Because like maybe we think, oh, she grieved and she was sad and she misinterpreted this prophecy. But for all we really well know, she's looking out for number one herself, and she wasn't into him that and didn't care and knew the prophecy. I think that's a really interesting thing that we just don't know an answer to, really.
That's an interesting point, because somehow she, like we pointed out earlier, you said yourself, there's the way she may have survived the purging of all the Strongs.
Yeah, it just shows that she's like,
pushing back against him, saying like,
self-serving and looks out for herself. I think is clear, at least.
Yeah, because the idea that he hates strong bastards, so like you would think that
on the wife, or bed warmer,
something has to explain that. Yeah,
I thought that was something that came up when I was reading, where a lot of times when we're talking about the powerful women and the men that they use, it's sort of like a what is it? They're swinging the king or the prince like a sword, but it's actually them having their own goals. Like Melisandre is using Stannis in order to win the war for the Dawn. She doesn't particularly like super care about him. She just thinks he's the right answer, and so she is helping.
Yeah,
and that happens quite a lot in other stories. So we know Aemon loves Alys, clearly in love with her. I really don't think she loves him, and she may not love the Strongs, like you were talking about. Like this was something we were talking about. I said in like an essay in your DMs last night. The story is that Lionel Baratheon and Breakbones died in a mysterious fire, and it's talked about. It's like, oh, maybe it was Larys Strong, their brother, who did it in order to take Harrenhal. Except Larys never actually used Harrenhal. It's like, oh, maybe it was Daemon, like assassinating him again. It's like, no, Daemon would show up on his dragon if he wanted to kill them. And then it's like, well, what about Alys? She's a bastard of House Strong. She's being treated like a servant. And then when you track what she's doing in the story, she gets everything.
Yeah.
The rest of the Strongs all die. Aemon kills them all. She gets Harrenhal twice. She gets a dragon. She gets a prince. It's like, it's very likely that she's not trying to help Aemon at all. She's just using him to eliminate her enemies for her and then take control, which is a very common idea, especially because Aemon is so hot-headed and doesn't think things through.
Yeah.
It'd be very easy to manipulate him into doing that for you.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So we've got another super chat, but just a chat from LML that relates to this Battle of the God's Eye. I'm going to put some art up on the screen that I have to talk about. But LML notes, he says, should be noted Caraxes is a red dragon, and there are no red dragons in the current story, so it's not likely to be Alys seeing Dany. Well, that makes me wonder, what color do they see in these visions?
Yeah, not knowing Vhagar is really...
Well, I know hear that as well, but I just mean like when she's looking in and seeing a vision, is it in full Technicolor?
Well,
yeah, that's a question I have. Is that like, is it always like that? And does it depend on what she's looking into? Like, is she looking into a storm cloud? Or
if they're far enough away, you won't be able to see their colors. If it's just dragons like way up in the sky, they're just like silhouettes.
But I think that it might not be clear basically what colors they are, regardless of color or distance or something like that. So I just wanted to address that.
Yeah,
they're usually not that literal from what I saw from my Pyres and Blood research. Like in particular, the one I always go back to is that Daeron the Drunkard saw a great black dragon dying over the Ashford Meadow, and it was Baelor Breakspear. Yeah. He is not a great black dragon. He just looks Dornish. Like,
well, he had black armor.
Black armor, right?
Yes. So it was literal, not figurative.
Yeah, but so still,
Valar had them too, and it wasn't even his armor; it was Valar's.
It was Valar's. Yeah, you're right. So it was meant. It was meant literally. Like, it was literally black, not figuratively a black dragon. Yeah.
And so the art,
it's like, who knows?
Yeah, it's a good point.
It don't match.
The art I have on screen right now is from the Battle of the God's Eye, as you can see there, and you'll notice that I have two different shots. And this is my little plug for Audible. When you buy the book Fire and Blood on Audible, you get a PDF of all the art in the book. But as it turns out, they didn't finish the art for the PDF that they released through Audible. So you can see there on the right is what was in the book, and on the left is what's released in Audible. So if you're interested in drafts or sketches of the artwork in the book, or you just want a nice PDF to refer to of the artwork, you might want to get the Audible copy, period. I just wanted to put it there I think it's interesting to see just how different it was from the first drafts that Doug Wheatley turned in to what was in the book.
That's cool. That's a great catch there, the difference of the art. I think a lot of people will be interested in seeing that difference. Okay, let's move on to the phase of which he's kind of in charge now. With Aemon's death and the war raging the way it did, we get this story where Sir Tyland, who is the hooded hand, the guy who was doing a pretty good job, the horribly maimed guy doing a pretty good job of running the realm right after the war ends, but he dies pretty soon after it. So he originally sends about 100 guys to take, including a Kingsguard, and then a few more show up from Castle Derry. And they head to Harrenhal, and here we go with a quote. There were at least 600 souls within the castle, a third of them men of fighting age. When Sir Regis demanded to speak to their lord, a woman emerged to treat with him, with a child beside her. The Witch Queen of Harrenhal proved to be none other than Alys Rivers, the base-born wet nurse who had been the prisoner and then the paramour of Prince Aemon de Targaryen and now claimed to be his widow. The boy was Aemon's, she told the knight. His bastard? Said Sir Regis. His true-born son and heir, Alys Rivers spat back, and the rightful king of Westeros. She commanded the knight to kneel before your king and swear him his sword. Sir Regis laughed at this, saying, I do not kneel to bastards, much less the base-born whelp of a kinslayer and a milk cow. So we talked about the marriage part already, so we don't have to rehash that, but this is kind of, she has all the sort of keys to establishing a dynasty here. She's the regent. She has a big castle. She has someone with important blood. It's like he's the main guy, but it's kind of like an heir because she's the regent. And, queen is a nickname. She's not literally the queen, but she's effectively in charge because
She's
this
queen,
boy...
like snaps. Yes, queen.
Yes, queen.
Yeah.
That's what they should have said.
So this boy is very young, so there's no way he would take over for a long time. Now, the mystery gets stranger here, and the timeline is also a little peculiar. Because not only does Alys Rivers' men drive this Kingsguard away, there's some magical things that happen, but we'll talk about that in a second. But the full length here, the winter fever comes right after this defeat of the King's men. So they can't send another attack. And then there's the regency of Aegon III, where none of this is mentioned. So presumably Alys Rivers is ruling Harrenhal at least until 136, if not longer. So that's at least a 5-year run. So she kind of has her own 5-year gap. And it is sort of a gap because we don't know anything that happens during that time other than it was winter, so at least we can kind of get an idea why they didn't try to take Harrenhal back. Also, there were bigger problems like Racalio Rendoon and what's-his-face, the Red Kraken. All these other bigger problems than Harrenhal, so I guess they were able to keep putting it off.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about some of the actual magic stuff here and see if we can
Is this a quote you want read?
What's that?
Is this a whole quote you want read?
No, I'm not going to read all
I
that. I have this whole huge passage.
It's like a long quote. I was like,
yeah.
maybe I can take that for you, Aziz. I was like, you're just going to wear yourself out there.
I'm going to read the last part of it, though.
Okay, what's the last part?
Okay, so
where?
here we go.
I'll
You
read
could
it
say,
for you.
right here.
From the name?
Part.
Oh, no. Just that highlighted section.
Yes.
When Ser Daemon assured him that no one was going to laugh at him, the messenger said, "Don't come again unless you mean to bend your knees," she says. "Any man who comes near her walls will die. There's power in them stones, and the widow's woken it. 7 save us all. She has a dragon. I seen it."
Yeah, so there's some people theorize that maybe the dragon was this child, but this really doesn't. This sounds like a dragon. Like maybe it's not a real dragon, as in it could be a glamour, but he's not speaking. He's speaking literally, or he saw a dragon. At first, I wasn't sure, but this passage makes it pretty clear. Joe, do you agree? And also, what do you think about this whole waking power from stones business? What's all that?
If she has a dragon, like, she is just winning the story at this point. She will have she will have combined all the magic into one, like something that took like maesters and sorcerers and Targaryen kings failed at, and Alys is just like, I got a dragon, no big deal. I don't even know where she got the egg, but whatever. I was actually thinking about something while we were talking about this. I don't remember. Do you remember if when they find Aemon's body, he still has his star sapphire in his skull?
They don't mention that. They only mention the sword, but they do say the sword is in his other eye. So it was in his real eye, not his sapphire. So it definitely could be there.
So what if she retrieved the star sapphire and used that for the glamour?
I love that idea. I wondered. I actually have that written in our notes. I wonder if she tried to recover No, not the sapphire. I wondered if she tried to recover Dark Sister, and I wondered if that's why Daemon's body is missing. If she recovered Daemon's body and used that Targaryen blood for who knows what.
Yeah.
Just a theory.
But see, my question is, like, I mean, if you're saying she used the sapphire for a glamour, do you think that would be the thing, or do you think she would want to, like, actually, you think she would want, like, some actual dragon?
Well, there's dragon bones.
That's what I mean. It's like, maybe that's, I think that's maybe more likely.
A little bit of A and B.
Yeah, all both. She's got it all there. Yeah.
It's true.
Well, whatever ingredients she needs, she has a lot of them.
Yeah, and what she does here is almost Shadow Baby-esque. If this is a true story,
Yeah.
that's the problem with Fire and Blood. It's hard to take these things literally because the source is an exaggeration, which George built in on purpose. But it's also super interesting, the idea that she woke power in them stones. Now, Harrenhal's not old.
No.
Harrenhal's very new. It's one of the newest castles in Westeros. So what is she waking? It's probably like, I mean, they probably harvested Harrenhal from other ruins just to get that many stones. They probably found ruins all over the Riverlands, piled them up. So maybe it's like almost like a Lovecraftian thing where they like, it's like a monument to death in the Riverlands, and she like wakened all the houses that have died throughout it, some kind of crazy thing like that.
Cool.
But like, I mean, knowing George and how much he loves Lovecraft, I wouldn't be surprised if that's what he wants you to think.
That's a great theory. I love that. And yeah, I also like how you talked about the age of Harrenhal not being significant and how it's just things that maybe it's built out of. That's great. That's a great take.
But the stones could also be the weirwoods, because Harrenhal was built with dozens and dozens of chopped down weirwood trees, and it's speculated that they don't lose their power when they die. That maybe there's something left in them because of just like the nature of what they are.
Yeah.
So it may not be the rocks themselves. Maybe it's all the weirwoods and the Isle of Faces. Maybe it's like a nexus point, a hinge of the world, like the wall kind of place.
That's exactly what I was wondering, whether this is a hinge of the world. It would make sense because it's by the God's Eye. I mean, if the children, like the green men, like they would pick a magical spot if that's a real thing, which we have plenty of evidence that it is. Yeah, so it's also isolated on a lake. Like, yeah, so I feel like it's the God's Eye is full of magic. It seems like it's not unlikely to be a hinge. I think so. The quote continues here. Ashaya, you want to read the last part here, the second part of the quote, which is the magic here.
Yes. The name of the messenger is lost to us, along with the name of the man who laughed. But someone did, one of Lord Derry's men. The messenger looked at him, stricken, then clutched at his throat and began to wheeze. Unable to draw breath, he was dead in moments. Supposedly, the imprints of a woman's fingers could be seen upon his skin, as if she had been in the room, choking him. So basically, she's Darth Vader.
Yes, that's a force choke, but from even farther than, I don't even know if Vader could do it from that far away.
Yeah, she's more powerful than Darth Vader. You heard it here first. Darth Rivers.
More powerful
Ooh,
than
that's
you
a
can
name.
imagine.
I hope to see that in the extended universe someday. Darth Rivers, that's a cool one. But yeah, like that's a shadow baby, isn't it? If that's real.
Yeah.
How else do you do that?
That's Shadow-esque for sure. And
so is she from Ashai? Is she a shadow binder too? What's going on?
There's another reference to shadow babies too. At least a oblique reference to shadow babies from her. At least one other. Maybe you know of another. But there's one of the rumors about her is she had a lot of stillbirths. And one of the rumors about her is because she had so many stillbirths that she's sacrificing these babies for power. And that definitely sounds like shadow babying to me, because you have the pregnancy and then this thing comes out and does your evil bidding, kills something, and then.
So would the idea be that she is not actually, she hasn't had as many stillbirths? It's that people are interpreting her stillbirths as like they're interpreting her shadow baby births as stillbirths.
So it's either they're actual shadow babies or they're real stillbirths. Yeah, both are possible.
Both possible. She could have some of both, but yeah, the idea that like they would be like, well, she was pregnant and she didn't have a baby, and like clearly she had a stillbirth, and instead she's like, mwahaha.
And because she's
that's
the magic
why that
thing,
strong man died.
They're saying she's sacrificing these babies for stuff. They might not be wrong. Yeah, they might be.
It may be like a Rhaego situation where they got used up.
Yeah.
Which seems to be what happened when Dany lit the pyre.
And we also have this symbolism of if Alys is taking, if like Melisandre takes some of Stannis' life force to make these babies, that's kind of what we're hinted at.
She stole Aemon's.
Right, she would take some of Aemon's, and Aemon's so young. And if he's kind of a White Walker figure with the sapphire eye and this aging unnaturally, then that kind of fits in pretty well. Especially
because like she literally, figuratively steals his power. She steals his child, so now she has the kingship through that. If she has a dragon, well, he lost his and she gained one, so that's kind of like a another kind of like theft sort of thing. It's like she took Aemon, took everything from him, let him die to Daemon, and then tried to like become Queen of Westeros, and like didn't do a bad job trying.
Yeah, that's true. She made a good shot. It was a good attempt.
Better than most.
And we don't know how it ends. Super chat from the prince that wasn't promised. Darth Revis equals Darth Rivers. Oh, nice.
There we go.
And he also says, and definitely Shadow Baby commented that on LML's stream a while back. Yeah, Good theory. So we're not the only ones to come up with that. I like to
Sure.
see that theory coming up elsewhere because that does give it more, I think, validity that other people are thinking the same thing. So that's very cool. One thing that's maybe missing from this is who these victims are, right? Like in this case, we know the victim is this person that got choked to death, but I'm not sure who all these other people would have been. But it doesn't kill the theory by any means. It's just maybe another unanswered question to consider. And we might get more of that. We might get, since we still have the second half of this story, presumably, to go in Fire and Blood 2, we may get like something a little more direct in terms of shadow babies. Maybe she sends a shadow baby after someone at the small council or something like that. Yeah, who knows? So let's move on here. The 5-year gap business we talked about that that line I talked about rooting them out of Harrenhal. I've got a particular quote. A stronger force would be required to root them out of Harrenhal. Nice. A stronger
Copy
force.
paste that one for myself.
So that's when this comes when they're planning to send a larger assault force to take Harrenhal. And I can see, on one hand, it seems a little incredible that she held Harrenhal for so long. But on the other hand, I can see how the circumstances would lead us to this. As I mentioned, it was winter, so that makes it really hard to bring an army together, especially if you're going to do a siege. And besieging Harrenhal sounds really hard because it's so big. Surrounding that would take a lot of men, so feeding all those men, really difficult. And we have other examples of small castles holding out in winter against large forces like House Peak did against Maekar. During his reign. That would have been, in fact, about 100 years later. So there's also, like I said, Dalton Greyjoy and Racalia Rendoon. But also, the longer they take to bring an army, the more chance she has to add more people to her kingdom,
Sure.
right? She's bringing in bandits and broken men. Eventually, these people are going to start having their own kids and be families and be more bought into this kingdom and be more willing to protect it.
And especially because she's taking on this figure of the witch queen, and essentially everyone knows that she's an old god worshiper. There's quite a lot of old god people still throughout the Riverlands, and especially during the dance. Is this when has the Winter Wolves already come down?
The Winter Wolves, yeah, the Winter Wolves killed Kristen Cole right around the same time Aemon dies, and then they get slaughtered. Before the end of the war. So yeah, we're certainly past that.
So yeah, very much could be a popular figure to rally around for those broken soldiers. Maybe like the Blackwoods and the and some of the other First Men houses come come around on them. And also, like, if you're talking about a Knight's Queen figure, I mean, like, how perfect is it that she kills everybody, seizes Harrenhal, then winter falls so nobody can dethrone her?
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, and to add to the last thing you said too, she would have the opportunity to, well, actually, no, never mind. Cancel that.
The Winter Wolves were settled, right? They were settled all over the Riverlands. They had families now. They had kids.
Right. It was, the few of those who survived, and even more of Cregan's army, because Cregan's army came down and they didn't ever fight. So that none of them were killed, really. So, yeah, so that's really big. So I have this next section I call the One True King of Harrenhal, which is funny because Black Heron hardly got to. I mean, he ruled his kingdom for a while, but he only had Harrenhal as his seat for weeks at most. We don't exactly know.
Very, very short.
We're told Aegon landed the day Harrenhal's castle was finished, which is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's close enough. So that's kind of funny that this kid, this son of Aemond, is the one true king of Harrenhal, and Alys Rivers is the one true queen of Harrenhal.
Yeah. She's doing a pretty good job. That's sort of a long-running thing with the Strongs that I found, is that nobody expects them to succeed, and then they do, and then they just all sort of stick around for forever. Like, among their 131 years that they were from Aegon's conquest until they supposedly went out, like, they're hand to the king or in charge of the kingdoms for like half of it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's big.
And Alys is similar, where she's having success no one expects, and everyone thinks she's a simpleton and a woods witch, but clearly not. She's succeeding where so many others have failed.
Yeah, and I wonder, this tying into our previous talk about Dark Sister, her reign would prohibit people from searching for the sword other than herself. So that would explain kind of retroactively why it was not found for so many years. Of course, being underwater helps with that too, but this adds to that whole business. Important to note that there's some views on Harrenhal that might be a little off here. We see Harrenhal through mostly the lens of A Song of Ice and Fire, where we see that Shella had to give it up. When Tywin brought his army, she had to run because she didn't have enough soldiers to defend it. Now, Harrenhal, and then Peter Baelish talks about how Harrenhal is a bit of a curse, not because of the curse, but because of the financial curse, which is that it's ruinous to try to fund this place. Prior to the Wents, though, the Lothstons were powerful because they had a large amount of the surrounding land. After the Lothstons, that policy was changed. They're like, look, this is just too powerful. You can't let those people get that powerful. So no king is going to allow the Harrenhal to not be in debt. It's basically like a way to keep them down. Make sure they're always broke. So you don't let them have all those surrounding lands. Give those surrounding lands to the Derrys and to the, well, I don't know, the other houses that are nearby. So Harrenhal can't fund itself. Because if it can fund itself, it's insanely powerful. That's what Harren had in mind. But
that's true. And it's noted that when Daemon took Harrenhal from Simon Strong, that he didn't just liberate the castle, he took their funds. And it's said to be not like a large amount of money, showing that, yeah, like you're saying, in the past, it used to be people could defend it because they actually got money from it, and from just like their success and their rule over the kingdoms as hands and masters of whisperers and all this stuff. Like, they were amassing large amounts of power. What you're talking about is probably in response to the Strongs in some way.
Yeah, you're like, we cannot allow that. Like, that's part of why the Tullys were given Riverrun by Aegon, because he's like, and why the Tyrells were given the Reach by Aegon, because he knew that those houses weren't that powerful on their own, and since they're not the traditional leaders of that region, there'll be some arguing within those regions over whether the Tullys or the Tyrells actually deserve to be in charge, which serves to keep them off Aegon's back. They're not going to gather and attack him if they're too busy infighting. So that's very clever.
Makes them dependent on the crown.
Yes, so there's some cleverness in Aegon's appointments of lords there that still plays out to this day. So let's try to imagine what happened. With our last few minutes here, let's try to imagine what happened to Alys, because we don't know the answer. We know that at least by 151 she was gone. That's a long ways. That's 20 years after she basically took over, because in 151 it was empty. We don't know how long it had been empty, but the quote is a few years at least, so maybe more than that, maybe 10, but and it was given to Lucas Lothston. This is when the Lothstons get it. And Felena Stokeworth, who was a mistress of Aegon IV. Lucas Lothston was the master at arms at the Red Keep at the time. So, well, what do you think? Do you have any theories on both descendants of this boy, whether this boy was probably just killed and that settled it, maybe anything that maybe happened to Alys, or just hit us with your theories?
Well, my most tinfoil thing of what happened to Alys is that she ended up being the ghost of High Heart.
Whoa.
She just kept going. And just like, well, the powers kind of match up. And like, we know from the ghost that maybe not literally her, but maybe part of their family, because we know Jenny of Oldstones is somehow related. Maybe that's like a similar bloodline going from Alys Rivers.
Two things here I would like to point out. One is, if Ghost of High Heart was Alys Rivers, cool. But if, for example, Ghost of High Heart was not Alys Rivers, but was instead her descendant, because Alys had children, and Jenny of Oldstones was also related there, then you could say that when he got with Jenny of Oldstones, she was actually a Targaryen.
Oh, wow.
See? It all comes together.
They're like, thinking she's too low for him. We're like, no, actually.
She's the real Song of Ice and Fire.
It would be really funny if it was like, oh, no, she's baseball. It's like, no, she's Aemon's long-lost great-granddaughter.
That's cool. Very cool.
But in a more practical sense, like, we see from a lot of these characters as they get older, these witchy characters, is they tend to regret their attempts at seizing power. Like, definitely the Ghost of High Heart. Yeah. Her what she did at Summerhall, what she enabled in Summerhall, and Melisandre, she's definitely expressing regret at this point at the things she's done. It's likely that Alys probably followed their path and found somewhere quiet in the Riverlands in order to die. But if she kept going, if she still was like, fuck it, we're doing this, I'm gonna continue being a witch queen, this fight isn't over just because I lost Harrenhal, then, I mean, any of these characters throughout the Riverlands, these magical witchy characters, could definitely be related to her, especially because we know she has a kid. So it's right there, the possibility.
And glamours give her the ability to escape, right? Like, that can explain how, like, if they took the castle, she just hides. And on the other hand, one interesting theory I have for her downfall that may have led to her downfall, especially if she was using glamours as a big part of her enforcing her rule and showing people how powerful she was. Well, the death of the dragons is maybe the beginning of the dropping off of magic somewhat. Now, there's some evidence, there's plenty of evidence to suggest there's still plenty of magic in this period without the dragons, even though it was tampered down. So let's say the hinge of the world that is Harrenhal started to get weaker. Well, if her glamours start failing, then she's going to start failing. If she just can't do that magic anymore, that could bring her down. That could at least be the beginning of the end. It would crumble her authority. You know?
Why she looks like the ghost of Highheart. No.
Yeah, she finally got old.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I'm
She
thinking
became
about
3
it,
feet tall.
I mean, who was the only person to see through Bloodraven's glamour? It was Dunk. So maybe this sort of thing just keeps. Maybe you're right. Maybe glamours did get weaker for quite some time because, for an instant, Dunk did kind of see Bloodraven. And then he switched back, but
maybe Dunk's not such a lunk after all. Okay.
Yeah, maybe Dunk's pretty strong. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
By the way, that will be Amanda or Disputed Lands or Crowfoot's daughter's video. I'm talking about the history of House Strong. She's talking about where they are today, and one of the main points is Duncan the Tall, or Duncan. Well, he's called thick, and he's called bullish. He's called strong. So, seems to be interesting.
Bullish, strong, breeding like a bull, the sire of all,
especially if he made his way to Winterfell and the Hodor with the vision of Bran. Anyway, that's a different thing.
Yeah, for more on that, check out Joe's video when it comes out.
Yeah, but these families never end. That's the point of the Rivers and the Strongs. It's like you think they're done, and just like the Weirwoods, they pop back up again. They're still in the Godswoods. The roots never go away, even if you hack off the top of it. It's amazing. So Alys, her descendants are probably still alive somewhere. I don't know if the kid ever would have tried to claim the throne. He probably wouldn't be able to because the Strong DNA overwhelms Valyrian. So he would probably still look like a Strong. So,
which is why Dunk still has brown hair, and other people might.
That would make sense.
Jenny Goldstone's why she might not look up. I'm just dying on this hill now.
Or Jon Snow. Oh my God!
You cracked it. Wow.
Well, if the Strongs and Starks are the same, and then you get
So for timeline purposes, if we're trying to, I think that I agree with you that it's pretty tinfoil to think that she's the ghost of Highheart, but her descendant is possible because Highheart has red eyes and stuff like that. She's so short; it's kind of hard to imagine.
Unless Alys was using a glamour the entire time we knew her in Fire and Blood, which maybe is possible.
It's possible. That's also pretty tinfoil.
I like the idea that she just looked like the ghost of Highheart the whole time Aemon was with her, and he had no idea that.
Just like Stannis doesn't know what Melisandre looks like. Right? Yeah.
Oh no, Aemon! No, don't do it. But her description, she does seem almost Melisandre-like in that she seems like larger than life, especially when she's standing there with naked in front of the Godswood, or when he lands and her hair's going out behind her and she's got the huge swollen belly. It's like this kind of reminds me of Mel in a way, just like how other people see her as incredible, larger than life figure.
Yeah.
Hey, she's just pregnant. She's not that big, okay?
Melisandre. That's the same language used when Davos is seeing her, right? Her belly when she outside of Storm's End when she takes her robe off and her belly is all described similarly. I'm going to check out the way those two paragraphs are written.
We got a question here from Jojo Lady Dane.
Okay.
That I thought was kind of interesting. Do we think that Betha Blackwood might turn out to be a witchy type when we eventually find out more about her? And that is kind of a vibe that I have gotten from her, is that with the Blackwood and the Old Gods thing, that if not a witchy, that she's a little more in touch with that side of things. Because that's something that obviously Egg is involved in. Egg is investigating these higher mysteries, and that's what happens to them all. So the idea that she is invested or knows something about that, I just thought it was kind of interesting. These Riverlands women and with the Old Gods connection.
Yeah, that was a big part of our Summerhall episodes. We don't really know that much about Betha, so we tried to speculate on what her role might have been in all this, whether she was against it or for it, and we really don't know. But the idea that she was for it makes sense, because if she was against it, that just makes the whole thing less likely to have happened in the first place.
Why would she have been there even? Just leave.
And that she was probably there.
I don't know. There's a little digression, but I still thought it was somewhat.
In LML, I think I saw his comment. He points out that Nettles was another character that was seen as a witch, a fire witch.
A fire witch versus
so
Alys is a Night's Queen type figure. He was pointing out.
That's a Amanda thing. She thinks Alys Rivers is the fire witch from the Vale.
Yeah.
We've got,
I mean, if she has a dragon.
Yeah.
Another bastard with.
We've got a super chat from Acre Frey for you, directed at you, Matt the Gathering. It says, "Can Joe say stop Scotch? Can you say it 3 times fast?"
He says no cheating.
What does no cheating mean? Like, do I get like
can't
voice
go really
text?
slow.
Yeah, you can't go really slow.
I'm gonna try. I failed on the Irish wristwatch before. That's how I say it to make
We've changed that one to Celtic timepiece to make it easier.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so stop Scott's scotch.
Okay.
That was only once.
Once, only
okay.
once.
That's true.
Oh.
We don't make people say it 3 times anymore.
It was because sometimes.
Scotch. Stop Scott's scotch.
Okay, I'll accept it.
Pretty good.
I've been working on my elocution as I'm making more videos.
Yeah, like especially if you're live streaming, right? It's an important skill.
You have to slow down. You have to enunciate everything. You can only speed it up in post.
So
That's an interesting idea. I've never considered talking very slowly and then speeding it up.
Just like a little bit.
Yeah.
You guys
sound like.
There you go.
Say it again.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious what that'll sound like. Aziz muted us because he had to cough.
And then I hit the button and it wouldn't come back on. So let's close out with one of our favorite websites.
TV tropes.
Which we've been talking about tropes a lot this episode.
I
Fire and Blood has its own section in
hours
TV
on
tropes.
This site.
We
Yeah,
could,
Fire and Blood does. A Song of Ice and Fire does. But yeah, there's awesome people on there who are going through it and putting these tropes in for this new book.
That's right. And one of the really fun things about TV tropes is because George has this reputation of breaking tropes and subverting tropes, it's interesting to look at what these tropes are and see individual examples of whether he actually broke the trope or inverted it or went along with kind of a standard trope. Because, of course, as we've said before, George doesn't break all the tropes. That would be just as predictable as using all the tropes. Well, not quite as predictable, but pretty darn predictable. So he changes how he likes to work with tropes. We'll set it that way. He takes different looks. So the TV tropes for Alys Rivers are the mistress, which is she was Aemon's mistress despite him being engaged to a Baratheon lady and valued her enough to actually listen to her. That one's fairly straightforward, except for the mistress is usually
she was a little bit less of a mistress, more of his partner at this point,
Yeah, exactly.
What you're getting at is that there was no conflict to do with her being his mistress. He didn't have a wife or anything.
And as it says here, engaged. He was engaged to Brett. He never actually married her. So the trope, it's not, I wouldn't call it subverting the trope, but it just doesn't quite fit perfectly because of it's not a marriage, that he didn't actually have a relationship with this person. They hadn't ever been together. Anyway, so the next one is morality pet, which is to a certain extent for Aemond. She manages to prevent him from strangling a squire who brought him the news about the Westerland's army being crushed at the battle by the lakeshore. So this one's, I don't know if he subverts this so much as that it's barely present, because this is the only example of that, and later she's pretty immoral. So
she's more moral than Aemond in this one instance, I suppose.
Yes, and being more moral than Aemond isn't saying much.
I don't think she makes him moral, but I think she does kind of lead him around by the nose and put her morality in his place. Where it seems like she's convincing him of quite a lot of things. So I guess that kind of makes sense if you stretch it.
Yeah, so it's not. So the trope inversion is that she's not the pet. He's the pet. He's being led by her.
I want to point out that if anyone listening to this is like, I strongly disagree with this classification under this trope, that's the great thing about TV tropes. You can go there and you can write what you think the tropes are and why you think this isn't the case or how it's subverted. It's like Wikipedia. It is open source. Many people contribute to this.
Yes.
So I just want to point that out.
The next trope is older than they look, and this one. There's no argument there. This is straight up. Yeah. It is said she was much older than you looked and use magic to keep herself young. That one's extremely straightforward. And the slight difference here is that she's not. She doesn't look young or old. She's just kind of ageless, and
she might be younger. Than she not that just in certain other cases. Anyways, it goes. She is ageless, and so we can't really put a.
The rumor is she use magic to keep herself young. That isn't actually proven because Melisandre does almost certainly that we have evidence that this is a thing.
She uses magic to keep herself young, and she's like, "I'm only 25."
I just aged well. What are you talking about?
I thought the age thing was kind of overblown in the text because she's a bastard daughter of if she's Lord Lionel's, they don't keep track of those things, especially not 150 years later. So it's I'm sure nobody actually knows her real name because it wasn't important enough to mark down because she was a bastard. That kind of happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Damon Waters, like where it's like, oh my god, he's gonna be incredible. It's like they clearly didn't value her. So
yeah, good point. The next trope is seer. She can see the future in fires and other things, and that's pretty straightforward. Yes, she is has prophecy. Now, the way George kind of inverts prophecy tropes somewhat in various ways. I'm not sure he does a whole lot of it here because in this case we don't really get to see what her prophecies are, so it's hard to subvert them when we don't actually have them.
Although we did see that when she was standing on the king's pyre in order to watch the battle, she definitely knew a battle was going to come because she gave herself like the best seat in the house. To be like, oh, this is going to be fun.
Damn right. She was also probably more confident in the outcome. Like, whoops.
I imagine she's one of the characters that probably did have accurate visions because they did keep like ghosting Daemon, who was actively looking for them.
That's true.
So I imagine she knew it was really going to happen and didn't tell Aemon. Or really told him what he needed to stay alive until they got there.
And she clearly was right about where Daemon was, right? I mean, she
over
found
and
him.
over.
Yeah, so that was not only where he wasn't, but where he was. You're right. That's she may be more of the Makoro style of accuracy rather than the Melisandre style of not so accurate. The next trope is something to remember him by, which is the trope of a person dying, leaving a pregnant woman behind. Now, this trope is very inverted, even though on the surface it sounds straightforward. The thing is, this trope is almost always a hero that dies, leaving behind like their descendant with like the sad, tragic princess figure or woman that has left to raise this, son. So this is very different because the son is not a good guy. She's not this tragic left behind figure, and Aemon certainly wasn't a hero. So he does a pretty good job inverting that one. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I don't know. It would just be kind of like if we find out in Winds of Winter, like they're secret Ramsay supporters. Like someone that's like, I miss his rule. It was so good to me. There's got to be somebody. He did have supporters, but it's like, if you're doing that for Aemon One Eye, you're a dick.
Yeah, or Yellow Dick in Ramsay's case.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Shoved right down the throat.
And finally, the last TV trope here is what happened to the mouse, which is
Shadrick the mouse?
No? Oh, Sir Shadrick.
Yeah.
The ageless Sir Shadrick.
Well, he's in the same spot. Her fate after the Dance of the Dragons is currently unknown. Any details about her bastard child by Aemon are also completely unknown. And the thing is, the trope, what happened to the mouse, is a minor character who the author forgets about or just declines to finish up on, like a dangling plot thread. Now, so it's not fair to call this a dangling plot thread because we expect this to be resolved in Fire and Blood 2. If it's not, then yes, it is a what happened to the mouse trope, like 100%. But I don't expect
Nettles,
that to happen.
depending on if that gets followed up, is more likely, I think, to not be followed up and to actually fit that.
Nettles is a little bit more of that category.
But again, we can't say for sure whether we won't get more of it. And that's the thing about covering an ongoing series, is that a lot of these tropes will change.
Like,
and
that one swan girl that took over the brothel is another one. They bring her up and then kind of like says, well, we don't have time to describe her here. And you're like, hey, well, she's cool though. I don't know about that. Or Sarah Targaryen, like we don't know what happened to her in the long run. Things like that. There's a lot of those. It is fair to say that what happened to the mouse applies to several characters here. I would say it doesn't apply to Alys Rivers though.
I would have a hard time believing that he's going to let Alys go because the main reason I started the House Strong history and video was because I think I've said this on other live streams before, but it was like I was blown away at how much George cares about this family who showed up so late. They only show up in A Feast for Crows the first time, like named. And then from there, it's just like skyrocketing references, and he's putting them in huge positions. Like Breakbones is at the center, and the Strongs are at the center of the Dance of the Dragons, and Alys is also at the center of it. He's not going to let her go, nor that Targaryen baby or that dragon if she has one. Those are coming back.
It's a huge deal when George retrofits something like that because it's important. Because if it wasn't important, he wouldn't have to do a retrofit. He could do something simpler. He could attach these factors to another existing house. Like he could have done some of the stuff with the Blackwoods or the Brackens instead.
Any family. It doesn't have to be the Strongs. Right. They were nobodies.
And that's why Darkstar. It's the same logic with Darkstar. Darkstar was a retrofitted cadet branch that didn't exist. So the fact that he's a Dane clearly matters. It's not if he wanted to. If it could have been someone else, he could have been an Uller or a Ironwood or anything. But he's a Dane, so that matters.
What's the one with the Ouroboros as their sigil? The Tollans? Tollans would be a good one.
The dragon eating its tail, yeah. That's a good point, yeah, because we didn't have their sigil ahead of time. I think the house had been named as like an offshoot, just an, you know,
the Tollan girl who has her dreams.
Yeah. Tiara Tollan, yeah. Okay, well, let's call that a day. I think we've covered Alys Rivers pretty well. Thank you for coming, Joe the Gathering. That's really going to stick more than Joey McWizards, I think. At least from us.
Well, maybe I'll just change it to my my Twitter handle and I'll just own it.
Oh, actually, there was one more thing I wanted to say regarding her dragon. Which are you on? So you're thinking it was a glamour, right?
I'm thinking that this is something that I noticed a lot when I was reading through Alys. It reminds me heavily of Melisandre, where she does have power, but then there's also a lot of elements of her faking stuff and playing on her reputation. So who is this random guy? Would he actually recognize a real dragon if he saw it? Like, what was the situation? I don't know. I think it's like...
I'm laughing at the idea of, like, would he recognize a real dragon if he saw it? Like, as if there's some, like a real baby
difference.
Dragon. Like, what was she got? She got, like, a lizard. And just like, it's a dragon!
It's a lizard lion. It's just
it's a random dude.
Yeah, sure, okay. I really am tickled by the idea, like, a lizard lion, like he said. Like, at a certain point.
I mean... It's not that crazy, but
no, it's not crazy. She just thinks imagining it. Yeah,
imagining it is funny, but also the idea that like her using like we're talking about like making a glamour. The idea that she did use like a base of like she got a creature and like used the glamour on this creature. Anyways,
like painting stripes on a horse and saying it's a zebra.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just picturing like this scenario.
She taped some wings onto a frog and was like, "Fear my."
If she actually has a dragon, though, I have like, where would she get the egg? Does that mean
Vhagar was there?
Clutch?
Vhagar was at Harrenhal,
but she was pretty old at that time.
Yeah, it's not likely, but that is where the egg would come from. That's my best guess for where an egg would come from.
So maybe Aemon was carrying one around with him, or there's a secret clutch of eggs out there still.
Yeah,
like, for that to happen, there's some really interesting backstory to be discovered.
Yeah, she would have had to lay an egg there, which is weird, or maybe Caraxes would lay an egg there, but Caraxes doesn't seem that likely either. But it's it's not 0% chance, we'll say.
Not zero. And, I still want to see the fake dragon, just like a crocodile.
Yeah, and
a baby crocodile.
You wonder if any of the other dragons that hadn't yet died out, because they were dead by 157. 157 is the year the last dragon died. So if this was a real dragon, which I agree with, like we all seem to be largely on the side of it wasn't, but let's say it was, it would have been dead by 157 because that's when all the dragons were dead by. You wonder if, say, the dragon Morning was used to attack Harrenhal. Maybe because that's the problem, right? If they had still had dragons, they could have taken Harrenhal back from her easily. But all the dragons were basically gone after the Dance of the Dragon. So that was kind of everything working out for her. Apparently, Sanrixian Super Chat here says, LML came up with Matt the Gathering.
Yeah, LML hates magic for some reason, so I used it to troll him. I like there's a really cool card in the current standard set that's a meteor coming down and destroying stuff. So I constantly send it to him like, look, it's the thing you think. He doesn't like it though.
Okay, well let's now we're really gonna wrap it up. So Matt, please tell everyone where to find you and
home address.
Yeah, actual home address,
coordinates, what
social security number.
Yeah, please let me know. But he says let people know it's me.
Allergies, pet peeves.
Yeah.
Well, according to Gray Area, I am the Weirwood from Winterfell, so you can find me there.
No.
Apparently, that was her explanation of who I am in universe. I'm a weirwood who knows everything. Okay, yeah, more real, I guess. The How Strong video that we've been talking about the whole time. I'm gonna try and get that out by Friday. Cool. So, and then Amanda should come out around the same time because we're doing it at the same time. We're gonna do a stream afterwards. Maybe In Deep Geek is gonna be on that. We're gonna work. The problem with he lives across the pond, so it's hard to work those things out. But we'll see if we can. And then I'm gonna do the 5,000 subscriber Q&A, which is even funnier to me now because now I have 6,400 since I made that announcement. So
change it to the 6,000 subscriber. Just
yeah. So people are like, you should take more questions. I'm like,
1,000 more.
That one's actually gonna be
1,400.
recorded. I'm gonna take video. It's not gonna be me talking over pictures. I'll just be doing this. So that'll be new.
Cool. Nice.
Maybe I'll tune in to see your pretty blue eyes as deep as
I'm
the
just gonna
ocean.
stare like this the whole time.
I want to see you chew gum and chalk at the same time.
I don't even know what that means. Like draw with chalk.
Yes.
No, I mean you're chewing gum and chalk. It's in your both in your mouth at the same time.
Oh, chewing chalk. Oh,
Well,
Aziz,
gum is already coated in chalk. That's what that is. When you open a stick of gum, that white powder, that's chalk.
Oh
I'm
my
not
God.
kidding. That's chalk.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's marble dust. Yeah.
The other thing that's going to be coming up is me and Gray Area are going to record something talking about the "Who's the Night King trying to kill" quote. We both have
cool.
different ideas, so we're going to talk it out. It's going to be a good one.
That should be fun. That maybe should have some book relevance too. Very, very possibly. Yeah.
I think it confirms one of my theories.
Oh,
Anyway.
that's always nice. When
The Waymar one. Anyway.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then Maester Monthly, we recently put out an episode, and we're planning the next one nowish. Yeah.
Great.
And then I'm not sure if I'm doing anything else for Watchers on the Wall besides the beer thing, but I'll think of something. But you can find me at all those places.
Cool.
And they can find you in person at Con of Thrones in July,
Yes.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Where I will be spending Aziz levels of time on stage, apparently.
Oh,
Cool.
really?
Well, maybe not Aziz levels, but pretty high.
Yeah, to get to Aziz levels, you got to be doing like 12, 13 panels.
Okay, so not Aziz levels, like a mini Aziz, like mini me version of him, like snack size. I plan to enjoy other parts of the con while I'm there.
Yeah, my limit's about 6 or 7 is the most I would really want to do, personally.
I just want to make sure, Ashaya, at all my panels, can you fix my microphone for me again?
Of course. Call me,
you.
beat me when you want to reach me. I'll be there. You know.
Put up the bat ash
Yeah.
symbol.
Exactly.
My mic's not working. Come help.
Be extra fitting if I actually bring my Lost in cosplay. Now, I don't think I'm going to wear Danelle Lost in to Con of
Ooh.
Thrones. It's so hot.
It
Like
is hot.
Nashville in
It'll be
July.
in Nashville, yeah.
I don't know about wearing leather armor, unfortunately. And I don't know about other people dressed as Starks in like their furs and stuff. No way for me.
Set that
A lot of respect I have for them, though.
That's going to be a sweaty con.
Yeah, I will just bring water everywhere with me and be like, hydrate, please. Please. You're going to be hurt.
I'm just going to throw money at San Rixie and be like, go get me some water. go buy a $4 water from the hotel or whatever.
That's hilarious. Okay,
All right.
we're gonna exit now. I'm not gonna do the Patreon credits because we're pretty far over today, and
Are
we have
we
some
now?
IRL stuff to run to.
Yeah,
So we get those in almost
Not
every
that much
time.
over, but
Occasionally we have to
Blood
skip
Raven
them.
3 is still coming.
Yeah,
It's so close. Poor Zach of Game of Owns has just been editing away, and he's realizing that, hey, editing and rendering and exporting a 2-hour plus video is not quite the same as doing a music video. And
No.
I'm quite validated to know that it isn't just like a walk in the park, and that there is some adjustments to the technical aspects of this all. So anyways, he's doing his little best with his little laptop. But yeah, there's a reason that my computer is beastly, because our episodes are quite intensive. So anyways, that's coming though.
So we might have it as late tonight for
Yeah.
$7 plus patrons, and then it'll go up.
More likely it's tomorrow. It's Wednesday is more likely for patrons. And I sure as hell hope it isn't longer than that. But honestly, technology, I get it that we're at its mercy. It's
Sometimes,
amazing and incredible, but also sometimes a little slower than we want.
There's parts we can't always control, like when you're uploading a video and waiting for it to process. You just have nothing.
Yeah. So
it's out of your
that's
hands.
our little excuse. Basically, if you're angry that we don't have Blood Raven 3 for you, go tweet at Game of Owns. That's what I'm saying. All right here.
That's not very nice, but it is very funny.
If anyone tweets at him, I'm gonna edit this out of the video, and Zach will have no proof that I said this. And he'll be like, so
Anything else you want to complain about to us? Directed Zach also.
yeah,
Like, if
don't
you-
direct it to Game of
if
Owns.
I ever
Tweet at
cut-
Game of Owns.
If I ever insulted you, just blame
Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah. Poor Hannah is gonna get these tweets and be
Yeah,
like,
I was
what?
like, what is going on here?
But yeah, so it would, so.
Anyway, okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. Thank to all our live viewers. Thanks to everybody who came to chat and hang out and make our live streams extra fun. The community aspect of this whole thing is part of what makes it great. We love diving through new material and going deep with these sort of semi-obscure characters that are always really important, even when they're obscure. So it's kind of a conundrum that obscure characters are important, but this is the fandom we live in, and we love it. So until next time, everybody, thanks Ashaya, thanks Joe, and thanks to Lauren.
Matt the Gathering, God Aziz, I'm going to cut you off.
Matt the
Goodbye.
Gathering.
I cut you off.